Chapter 681, High-Level Duel. The black fog before him was unlike anything Atticus Blaine had ever encountered during his training in PE class. It seemed to be Malfoy's secret weapon, and who didn't have a secret weapon of their own? As the black python slithered toward him with the speed of a swimming dragon, Atticus's green eyes gleamed with determination. In an instant, he resolved to vanquish these two menacing serpents and thwart Malfoy's audacious attack. With a swift retreat, Atticus deftly flicked his wrist, and the tip of his wand emitted a brilliant red light. The beam whistled sharply as it sliced through the air. To everyone's surprise, the thumb-thick red light unexpectedly split into two slightly thinner beams mid-air, leaving a faint arc in their wake. Then, bang, bang! As a gifted seeker, Atticus possessed extraordinary dynamic vision. The two red beams struck the advancing black pythons with pinpoint accuracy. With two crisp sounds that resonated almost simultaneously, the black pythons summoned by Draco Malfoy were immobilized by the radiant red orbs, crackling with electric energy before dissipating into blue smoke. Disarming Curse, Group Battle Version. Atticus had practiced the disarming spell hundreds of times, and during one casting error, the spell's light had exploded into dozens of rays before vanishing. He recalled when Professor Blaine had subdued Professor Moody and the stories he'd heard in his second year about Professor Blaine using a special stun spell to incapacitate Fred and George. Inspired, Atticus sought guidance from Professor Blaine, who, after some contemplation, devised an improved version of the spell capable of targeting multiple opponents simultaneously. This, of course, required the caster to possess strong magical micro-manipulation skills. Currently, Atticus could only direct the disarming spell at two opponents at once. Even through the space and black fog, Atticus could sense Malfoy's astonishment. For a fleeting moment, Atticus's pride swelled, but the situation remained precarious. If Malfoy continued to hide within the now static black mist, he was nearly invincible, and locating his true position was impossible. Whoosh! Malfoy's next attack came swiftly. This time, it was a simple petrification spell. Disarming spells, stun spells, petrification spells, obstacle spells, and other basic offensive spells were standard fare in PE classes. Professor Blaine insisted that everyone master them to a high degree of proficiency. The speeding cursed light punched a fist-sized hole through the black fog. Atticus caught a glimpse of Malfoy's fleeting, smug expression. Before he could consciously react, his well-honed reflexes from countless training sessions kicked in. He sidestepped, tilted his head to dodge Malfoy's petrification spell, and raised his right hand in a backhand motion, sending a counter-curse into the closing black fog, aiming where he anticipated Malfoy would move. Snap! To Atticus's dismay, his magic missed Malfoy, piercing through the black cloud entirely and striking the classroom wall. This exchange of attack and defense signaled the onset of a fierce battle, with spells flashing like meteors cutting through the night sky. The angles of Draco's curses from within the black cloud were cunningly calculated, revealing the considerable effort he had invested in his strategy. Atticus Blaine's dueling skills were impeccable. His attacks flowed with perfect rhythm, and his ability to predict Harry's next move was remarkably precise. Within just 20 seconds of intense confrontation, Atticus had gained the upper hand. Harry's movements, reminiscent of his Quidditch flying skills, were unpredictable and ethereal. He cleverly used feints to mislead Malfoy, causing his attacks to miss repeatedly. However, Harry's offensive capabilities began to wane. It was understandable. He couldn't seize the initiative to pinpoint Malfoy's position. He was forced into a defensive stance, relying on counterattacks and only able to locate Malfoy through his attacks. Malfoy, being astute, would immediately reposition himself after each strike, flickering like a ghost under the cover of the black mist. "Despicable Slytherin," Harry muttered through gritted teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. The black mist conjured by Malfoy was the crux of the problem. It obscured Harry's vision, but seemed to have no effect on Malfoy, who navigated it with ease. Harry considered charging into the mist to flush Malfoy out, but Professor Blaine's stern warning echoed in his mind. In a life-and-death duel, one must remain calm and analytical. Impulsiveness and anger would only lead to defeat. Uncertain of the nature of Malfoy's black mist, Harry feared it might be poisonous, a plausible assumption given Slytherin's notorious reputation. "Fire is raging," Harry shouted, his wand erupting with a ball of blazing flames. Yet the flames neither illuminated the mist nor ignited it. However, the hot wind compressed the boundary between the mist and the clear space. "Wind," Harry paused, stunned for a moment. In that brief hesitation, Malfoy had already moved 10 feet away, casting 2 cursed lights, one aimed at Harry's chest, the other at his feet. Armor protection. With no time to dodge, Harry raised his wand, conjuring a magical barrier that successfully blocked the curse targeting his chest. He prepared to counterattack, but as his foot landed, his expression shifted dramatically. A freezing spell. Even before glancing down, Harry realized the curse Malfoy had cast at his feet. He was frustrated that such a basic mistake, losing physical balance, had nearly cost him the duel. He refused to accept defeat. His strength matched Malfoy's, yet he was outmaneuvered by Malfoy's cunning tactics. Harry was determined to dispel the black mist that rendered Malfoy invisible. From the effects of the fire spell, he had discovered a simple method to disperse the mist, but it was unexpected. Before hitting the ground, Harry ignored Malfoy and focused on a window on one wall, raising his arm swiftly. Draco's light gray eyes gleamed with triumph as he watched Harry falter, believing he had finally won the duel against Potter. But before Draco's smile could fully form, a sudden crash shattered the window, momentarily stunning him. In the depths of winter, the night wind was fierce enough to chill to the bone. As the window burst, the icy wind flooded the classroom like a torrent, plunging the once warm room into a freezing abyss. The powerful gust swept through, dispersing the dense black mist that had enveloped the room. Draco Malfoy was utterly defeated. For the first time since the duel began, he appeared in everyone's view, a turn of events that left him as shocked as anyone else. He hadn't anticipated that Harry Potter would see through his deception. In his moment of confusion, Draco lost the advantage he had painstakingly gained. Seizing the opportunity, Harry struggled to his feet, half crouching on the ground as he caught his breath. Meanwhile, Draco, who had been staring in disbelief at the windows where the strong wind continued to gust, noticed Harry rising from the corner of his eye. His expression shifted, darkening with frustration. "You're very lucky, Potter," Draco muttered begrudgingly. But Harry, who had endured Draco's taunts for far too long, could no longer contain his anger. His green eyes blazed with fury, and in the next instant, he charged forward like a fierce young lion. End of this chapter. Chapter 682, Life, Death, and Victory. Suddenly, Malfoy was finally exposed to everyone's sight. Harry, who had been frustrated for a long time, leaped up from the ground, ignoring his hair that was tousled by the strong wind, and charged towards Malfoy like an angry lion cub. His fierce momentum almost made Malfoy think that Harry was ready for a showdown between real men. After all, when they were younger, disputes often ended with fists as a means to express anger and resolve conflicts. However, Draco quickly dismissed this thought. After receiving professional guidance from Professor Blaine for so long, resorting to fists in a duel would be an insult to both himself and Professor Blaine. As expected, Harry stopped less than 20 feet away from Malfoy. He wasn't looking to solve the problem with physical combat, but rather to prevent Malfoy from pulling any more despicable tricks. At this distance, with his speed, Harry could close in on Malfoy in a second. Whoosh! 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 A more intense magical showdown began. If the previous high-frequency confrontations were gentle like a drizzle, the current clash between Harry and Draco was a raging storm. Both abandoned the idea of using complex maneuvers to win, instead pursuing extreme speed in their attacks. They employed simple spells and straightforward casting movements, their arms moving so swiftly that they left afterimages in the air. They were inducing, dodging, consuming, and oppressing each other's space. This was a pure test of dueling skills learned in Professor Blaine's physical education class. Rather than relying on their spells to defeat their opponent, they were forcing each other to reveal flaws and lose on their own. The cursed lights emitted by Harry and Draco flew around the room, and the explosions and fires resembled a series of firecrackers going off. To avoid being caught in the crossfire, Pansy and Astoria hid behind the armor, and a stunned Ron was dragged behind another piece of armor by Hermione. Was this a duel between young wizards, or a magical competition between the Ministry of Magic's elite aurors? Ron's eyes widened in confusion. Such a fierce competition only lasted 10 seconds before the situation on the field became clear. Harry began to gain the upper hand. The courage embedded in the blood and soul of a Gryffindor made Harry fearless. At the same time, he was filled with an unprecedented excitement, even smiling unconsciously. His green eyes were tinged with bloodshot intensity. This short and exhilarating duel reminded him of the thrill and joy of winning last year's Quidditch final. In a duel, the competition of momentum is crucial. The distance between the two gradually closed, reaching a point where they could touch each other in 2 strides. At this proximity, dodging curses became increasingly difficult, and some rays of cursed light even grazed Draco's cheek. He was scared. "It's over, Malfoy!" The fear gradually seeping from Draco's eyes was not lost on Harry. He shouted, turning his head to dodge a curse that singed a few strands of his hair. He suddenly lunged forward, grabbing Draco's right wrist with his left hand, and thrust his wand forward like a dagger, stopping an inch from Draco's terrified eyes. However, before Harry could deliver his victory speech, he noticed Draco's expression shift from fear to joy. "That's not good, Potter," Draco grinned, baring his teeth. Before Harry could comprehend the situation, Draco dropped the wand from his restrained right hand, flipped his wrist, and instead grabbed Harry's sleeve tightly. "Get out of the way," Draco muttered, his eyes gleaming with a newfound confidence. "Harry!" Hermione's voice pierced through the air, jolting Harry from his daze. She had leapt out from behind a suit of armor, her face a mask of terror. A chilling hiss echoed in the corridor, and though Harry didn't turn his head, a vivid image formed in his mind. A menacing black python slithered from the armor's depths, coiling itself around the helmet, its fangs bared, and its eyes fixed coldly on his neck. Harry's cheeks blanched as realization struck him. The snake, hidden within the armor, was undoubtedly Malfoy's doing, a trap set before the black fog had dissipated. Malfoy had been biding his time, waiting for this very moment. With a swift motion, a shadow darted through the air, leaving a fleeting afterimage. Harry felt a sudden weight on his shoulders, followed by a chilling sensation on his cheek. The snake now perched on him, its presence paralyzing Hermione and Ron with fear, leaving them breathless and wide-eyed. "You lose, Potter!" Draco Malfoy's voice rang out, his pale cheeks flushed with triumph, his gray eyes alight with glee. This was no mere schoolyard skirmish, it was a genuine duel, and in his mind, a decisive victory. The python's fangs glistened menacingly, and Harry could smell the acrid stench of its breath. His nerves screamed in alarm, warning him of the dire consequences of a single bite. The thought of losing to Malfoy in a duel was intolerable, a notion Harry quickly dismissed with steely resolve. "That's not good." Harry's eyes blazed with defiance as he locked eyes with Malfoy, who wore a smug grin. "I give you your words back," he retorted. Draco's smile faltered, his expression darkening. The snake, sensing its master's mood, edged closer to Harry's face, its venomous mouth dripping with malice. "Are you being stubborn, Potter, or are you not understanding the situation?" Draco taunted coldly. "I can end your life at any moment. The Dark Lord must have made a grave error for you to have escaped." "Then you should ask Voldemort himself what he did wrong," Harry shot back, his voice unwavering. "I'm well aware of the situation, but have you overlooked something, Malfoy?" He subtly adjusted his wand, his tone sharp and resolute. "I still have my wand, Malfoy. Unless your snake can kill me instantly, you won't survive either." "You don't have the guts, Potter. You're just bluffing." Draco sneered, though the mention of the Dark Lord's name made him shiver. Before he could retort, Harry's next words cut through his bravado. "Oh, yes, you think so?" Harry challenged. "Then why don't you give it a try?" "Stop it, Harry." Hermione's voice broke through the tension, snapping the rest of the classroom back to reality. Pansy, Astoria, Ron, and Hermione were all frozen, stunned by the sudden escalation from a duel to a life-and-death standoff. Hermione, regaining her composure, screamed in desperation and moved to intervene, hoping to separate Harry and Malfoy. But just as she took a step forward, clang! The classroom door burst open with a loud crash, and a figure stumbled inside. Neville, rubbing his arms and grumbling, had collided with the door, leaving him momentarily dazed. As he regained his footing, he realized he was not alone in the room. His eyes widened in shock as he took in the scene, his expression mirroring the disbelief of those around him. Silence enveloped the room, broken only by the crackling of torches swaying in the cold wind. No one spoke. Hermione, who had been on the verge of stepping between Harry and Malfoy, was momentarily bewildered by Neville's unexpected entrance. "I twisted the door handle for ages, but it wouldn't budge. I thought it was stuck, so I just barged in," Neville explained, his voice cutting through the tension. Under the scrutiny of everyone's gaze, he quickly shed his sheepish grin and added nonchalantly, "Am I interrupting something?" End of this chapter. Chapter 683, Lonely Soul. Neville did his best to mask his embarrassment and the pressure of so many eyes on him, but his gaze kept drifting towards Harry and Malfoy. He saw the two of them locked in a struggle, with Harry's wand pointed at Malfoy. A fierce snake was coiled on Harry's shoulder. Neville, familiar with the physical education class, knew exactly whose snake it was. It didn't take much thought to figure that out. "Could it be?" he began, but the broken windows allowed a steady stream of cold wind to sweep through the classroom, causing the torches on the walls to flicker wildly. Despite the low temperature, Neville was already sweating profusely within half a minute. He turned to Hermione, his eyes still fixed on Harry and Malfoy. "Isn't it right?" Hermione took a deep breath, her expression one of exasperation, and walked towards Harry and Malfoy. "Get your vipers off Harry's shoulders, Malfoy. That's enough!" she demanded. She first took hold of Harry's wand. Harry hesitated, but said nothing, and then turned her gaze to Malfoy, her brown eyes flashing with a dangerous intensity. Under her powerful stare, Draco, who had been about to speak, averted his eyes as if burned. He looked at Harry, his nose wrinkling in reluctance. With a sharp motion, Draco slapped Harry's hand away with his free hand, then bent down to retrieve his wand. He waved it at the summoned black python, which immediately dissipated into blue smoke. The students in Atticus Blaine's physical education class had taken action for the first time, unexpectedly, against each other. Fortunately, although the duel was perilous, neither party was seriously injured. If the duel's outcome was about victory or defeat, Draco could be said to have a slight edge, but if it was about life and death, it ended in a draw. "Watch your mouth, Longbottom," Draco snapped as he passed Neville, casting him a cold glance. After leaving those words, he took Pansy and Astoria with him, leaving Neville standing there, his face flushed with embarrassment. Before exiting the classroom, Draco paused and turned to look at Harry, who was staring back at him, unmoving. Their eyes met in midair, and they both saw disgust mirrored in each other's gaze, along with some unfamiliar emotions. "What's going on, Hermione?" Neville asked, his voice slightly trembling, accustomed as he was to Malfoy's insults. "Let's talk about it later, Neville," Hermione replied, brushing off the spot on Harry's shoulder where the snake had been. She glanced around the disheveled classroom and sighed. "Let's clean this place up first. If anyone else comes here to train later, we can't have this mess." Halfway through her words, Hermione suddenly remembered something and fixed Neville with a serious look. "Neville, this time, you can't do what you did in the first year. If Professor Blaine knew, he would definitely not tolerate Harry and Malfoy's behavior." After leaving the confines of Hogwarts, Atticus Blaine apparated directly to London. When he and Dumbledore had left Hogwarts simultaneously, with Vicia Cleona still at the school, he initially planned to head straight to the Ministry of Magic, not wanting to be away for too long. However, he reconsidered, realizing that acting too hastily might reveal some flaws. Besides being a wizard with significant expertise in dark magic, Voldemort was also extremely intelligent. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to hide under Dumbledore's nose for so many years and enchant so many loyal followers from prominent families. After some thought, Atticus decided to send a letter requesting a visit. Atticus Blaine stood in Barty Crouch's office, adhering to the usual formalities. He inquired about Crouch's availability for a meeting the day after tomorrow. After their conversation, Atticus checked into a Muggle hotel near the Ministry of Magic. The Ministry, nestled in the bustling heart of London, was surrounded by the vibrant energy of an international city. Although Christmas was still over 10 days away, the festive spirit was already palpable. Sen, Owlflakes occasionally drifted from the sky, adding to the charm. Every shop along the street was adorned with Christmas decorations, and behind the glass windows of towering buildings, colorful images of jolly, white-bearded figures and twinkling lights were on display. The lively sounds of the city persisted late into the night. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, Atticus watched the throngs of people below, their laughter and chatter barely muffled by the excellent soundproofing. For a moment, he was lost in thought. In the 2 years following his graduation, Atticus had often kept up with Muggle news. However, since Dumbledore had summoned him back to Hogwarts 2 years ago, the magical world had consumed his attention, leaving little room for the Muggle realm. Even the children and kind-hearted staff at the orphanage where he was raised rarely crossed his mind. Reflecting on this, Atticus's youthful face bore signs of wariness and experience beyond his years. He sighed softly. By nature, he preferred the life of a ranger over being the famous Atticus Blaine he had become. Yet, one event after another had deepened his ties to the British magical world, making it impossible to sever those connections. Whether by choice or necessity, he found himself responsible for the fate of nearly 100,000 residents of the magical community. As his thoughts wandered, Atticus recalled the secrets he had uncovered in the Centaur Holy Land and the hidden chamber in the kitchen, accessed through an entrance left by Hufflepuff. If he ever had the chance to return to his previous life on Earth, it might mean leaving this enchanting magical world behind forever. Where would he choose to go? In his past life, the faces and voices of his parents, bound to him by blood, lingered in his memory. He had friends in that world, and a lover from whom he had parted with regret. What impact had his departure had on their lives? Would they wish to see him again? Would they want to see him as an ordinary person once more? In this world, if he were to leave, how many would truly miss him, and how many would rejoice? As he gazed at his reflection in the glass, Atticus smiled wryly. Travelers, like him, could explore multiple worlds, a seemingly enviable experience. Yet in truth, they were akin to lonely spirits, with no place to call home. As the years passed, the transition from one year to the next often brought about a sense of nostalgia. With a sigh, Atticus gestured, and the heavy cashmere curtains drew shut, sealing off the vibrant scene outside. Due to his restless thoughts the previous night, Atticus abandoned his plans to explore the Muggle world the following day. He neither studied magic nor pondered complex issues. Instead, he spent the day resting in his room. It wasn't until the evening lights flickered on that an unexpected owl roused the somewhat disheveled Atticus. The letter was not from Barty Crouch, but from Percy. As he read the formal language of the letter, Atticus raised an eyebrow, then shook his head slightly and transformed the letter into a wisp of smoke curled delicately in the palm of Atticus Blaine's hand. End of this chapter. Chapter 684, Percy. As a new day dawned, the cool sunlight chased away the remnants of the night's revelry, breathing life back into the city of London. Despite a slight rise in temperature, the air remained frigid, turning the soft snow into treacherous ice. Pedestrians hurried along the streets, occasionally slipping on the slick surfaces. "Oh, crap!" exclaimed a young woman at the subway crossing. She wore a goose-yellow coat and high-heeled black leather shoes, and had just managed to break free from the bustling crowd. Unfortunately, she stepped on a small patch of ice on the sidewalk, losing her balance. Her body tilted backward, and the steaming paper cup of black coffee she clutched flew from her grasp. Just as she braced for an embarrassing fall, a strong hand caught her, steadying her. "Thank you," she gasped, patting her chest to calm her racing heart. Turning to see her rescuer, her expression froze. The man who had saved her from a potentially painful spill was young and striking. His soft gray hair shimmered in the sunlight, and his handsome features and upright posture could easily belong to a movie star. But it was his eyes that captivated her most. Mysterious lavender eyes that seemed to hold a starry sky within them, drawing her in with an almost gravitational pull. "You're welcome," the man replied with a smile, handing her the still warm paper cup. "Oh, thank you," she repeated, her cheeks flushed. To her surprise, the coffee hadn't spilled at all. "How did you do that?" she asked, astonished. "Oh, just quick reflexes, nothing special," he replied with a modest smile. Well, I hope you have a wonderful day, beautiful lady. With a nod, he turned and continued on his way. As the gray-haired man disappeared into the crowd, the young woman watched him go, biting her lower lip in fascination. When he turned into a small alley she hadn't noticed before, she snapped out of her daze. Ignoring the potential wrath of her supervisor for being late, she tossed her coffee into a nearby trash can and hurried after him. "Hey, wait a minute," she called, catching up to him in the alley. She brushed a few strands of light blonde hair from her eyes and shouted, "I'm Louise." The man turned to face her, his calm gaze meeting hers. Her heart raced as she introduced herself. "Louise Onder, that's my name. I'm a reporter for the London Daily News." "Hello, Miss Onder. I'm Atticus Blaine," he replied, his lips curving into a polite smile. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" Louise clenched her fists inside her sleeves, committing his name to memory. She felt a twinge of embarrassment at her boldness. It was the first time she'd ever approached a stranger like this. "I was just thinking," she said, slightly breathless, "if I wanted to see you again, where should I go?" Atticus blinked, neither surprised nor flustered. He nodded slightly, an apologetic look in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Miss Onder, but I don't visit this country often. If you wish to buy me a cup of coffee, it might be a long wait." His words carried a clear refusal, and Louise felt a pang of disappointment. She nodded and slowly backed out of the alley. Suddenly, a soft noise echoed in the alley. Louise was surprised. Couldn't he at least have left his phone number? When she rushed back into the alley, the man who had introduced himself as Atticus Blaine was nowhere to be found. The alley stretched out before her, empty and silent, with all the shops on either side closed. There was no way he could have slipped into one of them. "Damn it, can you do magic and walk so fast?" she muttered, stamping her feet in frustration as the cold wind rustled a few old newspapers on the ground. In the deserted alley, she was the only one left, a muggle girl feeling utterly exasperated. "I am Arnold Peacegood, Mr. Blaine. I am a registered counselor with the team that reverses accidental magical events. Professor Blaine, it is such an honor to meet you. May I shake your hand?" "Oh, Mr. Blaine, I am Raimundo White. I work at the Apparition Testing Center. How can I assist you?" "You must be here to discuss something important with the minister, Mr. Blaine. If you need it, I can send a message for you." A short, middle-aged wizard with a square face eagerly pushed his way to the front. "By the way, I'm Eugene Jenkins. I work in the Centaur office. Ho-ho, I'm quite free and available to run errands for you." It wasn't until the elevator ascended that those enthusiastic, smiling faces disappeared from view. Atticus, who had maintained a friendly smile throughout, finally let it drop and sighed in relief. After the Quidditch final night, he had assisted the Ministry of Magic in capturing some notorious dark wizards. During that period, his frequent visits to the ministry had caused quite a stir each time. He had hoped that after a few months, the excitement would have waned, but to his surprise, it hadn't changed at all. Atticus was familiar with Barty's office location. After all, they had worked together while trying to qualify for the Triwizard Tournament. He took the elevator to the International Magic Cooperation Department on the 5th floor. After causing another wave of exclamations in the solemn corridor, he finally arrived at the door of old Barty's office. "Please come in," came a clear voice from behind the door, with a hint of feigned calmness. Atticus smirked slightly and pushed the door open. Whoosh! Light purple paper airplanes were flying around the vast office space, creating a scene of chaos akin to a plane crash. Despite the disorder, the fireplace continued to send out paper airplanes stamped with the Ministry of Magic's seal. Atticus's gaze traveled to the innermost part of the office. Old Barty was not behind his desk, which was not surprising. A new assistant's desk had been set up under the bookshelf beside the original desk. Percy Weasley, the third son of the Weasley family, immediately jumped up from his seat upon seeing Atticus enter the room. He hurriedly stepped out from behind the table, but the paper airplanes, seemingly displeased with Percy's distraction, swooped down from midair, aiming for his head. Clang! "Oh damn, you guys!" Percy exclaimed as the paper airplanes obscured his vision. In his flustered state, he stumbled out from behind the table. He managed to get back on his feet, but the paper airplanes continued their relentless pursuit, swirling around the room. They seemed to have grown impatient and launched a full-scale attack on Percy. In an instant, he was enveloped in a flurry of paper airplanes. Seeing this, Atticus's lips twitched in amusement. He drew his wand and flicked it deftly. A tangible wave swept across the office, as if time itself had paused. The paper airplanes caught in the wave hovered in midair, allowing Percy to escape their siege. His hair was a disheveled mess, and he had lost one of his shoes in the commotion. Fight with the paper airplane. Percy lowered his head, staring at his feet on the woolen carpet, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. He quickly dove into the pile of papers, searching frantically. Brain teaches. Ahem! He stammered, trying to regain his composure. When Atticus Blaine instructed the paper airplanes to line up neatly, Percy finally found his shoes. His face still red, he straightened up and faced Atticus, placing a fist under his lips to cough twice, producing a deep sound. Welcome, Mr. Blaine. How was your journey? Percy asked, trying to sound professional. Ho ho, I'm doing quite well, Mr. Assistant, Atticus replied with a cheerful smile. He slipped his wand back into his pocket, and as he approached Percy, picked up a paper airplane, giving it a quick glance. I'm sorry if I had known about you earlier. Oh, it says here that the toilet in the bathroom at the International Federation of Wizards branch office exploded. I hope you can go over and take care of it. Can I wait for you for a while? End of this chapter. Chapter 685, Your Uncle is Still Your Uncle, Part. What a toilet! Percy was momentarily confused, his thin cheeks turning a deeper shade of red. Oh, that must be a prank. Kadir enjoys playing little jokes on others at the branch office. Mr. Blaine. Percy, who was already half a head taller than Atticus Blaine, tried hard to compose himself, smoothing the folds of his suit jacket with both hands. That's right, Mr. Blaine, I've received. Percy, Atticus interrupted with a smile, do you think it would be more convenient if we sit down and chat? Oh, of course. Percy coughed twice, managing not to choke. He led Atticus to the coffee table on the other side of the office. Before Atticus could sit down, Percy landed on the soft cushion with a thud, looking at Atticus expectantly. Atticus sighed inwardly, resigning himself to the fact that Percy wouldn't offer him anything to drink. I have received. Percy began impatiently as Atticus sat down, but Atticus interrupted him again. How's it going, Percy? Atticus could see that Percy was trying hard to take the initiative in the conversation, but unfortunately, even if Dumbledore or Fudge wanted to do this, it would be unlikely. With Percy's inexperience, it was even more impossible. Oh, the blush on Percy's face spread to the tips of his ears. He undoubtedly wanted to speak to Atticus Blaine on equal footing, but every time he tried to focus on Blaine's eyes, the gentle smile on Blaine's face seemed to have a special magic. Percy's gaze would wander, and his head lowered before he realized it. As you can see, I am now Mr. Barty Crouch's personal assistant. Speaking of Mr. Crouch, Percy seemed to regain some courage. His hands trembled slightly on his knees from clenching his fists too hard. Mr. Crouch trusts me, so he has given me the authority to handle some daily affairs for him while he is on sick leave. Oh, really? Atticus glanced at the paper airplanes and smiled. It seems you are already comfortable with this job, right? The psychological defense Percy had just built was dismantled by Atticus's words. He still tried to maintain his dignity, but his voice was low, almost mumbling. Normally, there wouldn't be such chaos, Professor Blaine, but last night I was involved in Mr. Barty Crouch's place discussing Ms. Bones's proposal to expand the batting corps. They argued until the early hours of the morning, Miss Bones and Miss Umbridge. Miss Umbridge always disagreed with the proposal. She thought our budget was limited, and the current state of the wizarding world wasn't serious enough to warrant spending a lot of money and energy on training hitters. Minister Fudge has been unwilling to express his opinion, so they kept arguing. I think Miss Umbridge's statement is more convincing, but no one asked. Percy suddenly realized he was rambling. He looked at Mr. Blaine, who was leaning back on the sofa, listening with great interest. His breathing was rapid. Let's talk about your affairs, Mr. Blaine. You said you want to visit Mr. Crouch and have some matters to negotiate with him, right? What exactly is it? Percy's change of topic was abrupt, and his tone sounded a bit rude. However, Atticus didn't mind. He nodded slightly and said, Indeed, Percy, I am very dissatisfied with the Ministry of Magic's negligence in some matters. Atticus's eyebrows furrowed slightly, and his suddenly solemn tone almost made Percy jump. So I want to discuss this with Barty, but someone told me that Barty took sick leave, and you are responsible for some affairs of the International Magical Cooperation Department. I don't want to scare you, Percy. This is a challenging job. If possible, I would like to. Hair softened instantly, replaced by a mix of surprise and respect. Atticus Blaine, it's truly an honor. Atticus Blaine, who had been quietly observing the exchange, offered a gentle smile. Hello, Goldstein. It's been a while. I apologize for the unexpected intrusion. Percy, still flustered from the heated discussion, turned to Atticus with a mix of relief and confusion. Mr. Blaine, I didn't realize you were here. Atticus nodded, his demeanor calm and composed. I was just waiting for the right moment to step in. It seems this matter requires a bit of diplomacy. Goldstein, regaining his composure, addressed Atticus with a hint of desperation. Mr. Blaine, you understand the complexities of this situation. Ali Bashir may have been reckless, but the timing of the law's enforcement is crucial. We can't let an oversight lead to such severe consequences. Atticus considered Goldstein's words carefully. I understand your concerns, Goldstein. The law is indeed a delicate matter, and timing is everything. Perhaps there's a way to address this without resorting to extreme measures. Percy, feeling the weight of the situation, interjected, But Mr. Blaine, Mr. Crouch was very clear about his stance. He wanted to set an example. Atticus turned to Percy, his expression thoughtful. Percy, setting an example is important, but so is fairness. We must ensure that justice is served without overstepping the bounds of reason. Goldstein nodded in agreement, his earlier frustration giving way to hope. Exactly, Mr. Blaine. If we could just have a conversation with Mr. Crouch, perhaps we could find a more balanced solution. Atticus smiled reassuringly. I'll see what I can do. In the meantime, let's keep the lines of communication open. It's important that we work together to resolve this matter amicably. With that, the tension in the room began to dissipate. Percy, though still a bit on edge, felt a sense of relief knowing that Atticus Blaine was involved. Goldstein, grateful for the intervention, offered a respectful nod before taking his leave. As the door closed behind Goldstein, Atticus turned to Percy with a gentle smile. Remember, Percy, diplomacy often requires patience and understanding. Let's see how we can navigate this situation together. Percy nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Thank you, Mr. Blaine. I'll do my best. With a reassuring pat on Percy's shoulder, Atticus Blaine settled back into his seat, ready to lend his wisdom to the challenges ahead. Atticus Blaine's dark yellow hair and slightly heavier frame seemed to vanish like magic, replaced by a look of surprise and a hint of embarrassment. He placed a reassuring hand on Percy's shoulder, rendering Percy momentarily speechless. With a warm smile directed at Goldstein, Atticus said, You got that right, Goldstein. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but your conversation was hard to miss. He shrugged apologetically. It's me who should apologize, Mr. Blaine, Goldstein replied, his excitement evident. I didn't realize you and Weasley were discussing something important. Perhaps I should come back at another time. I don't think we need to wait until next time, Atticus interjected, raising his chin with a gentle smile. I overheard that you wanted to speak with Mr. Crouch. As it happens, I also plan to visit him. Perhaps I can help convey your message. Is it about Ali Bashir smuggling flying carpets? If so, he must secure the necessary permissions before the new laws are enacted, correct? You're right, Mr. Blaine, Goldstein whispered, catching Atticus's hint. Miss Umbridge approved the note for him, and the Oswald family has been handling the sale of the flying carpets. Atticus nodded slightly. I'll explain the situation to Barty. Goldstein, would you mind if I had a bit more time alone with Mr. Crouch's assistant? End of this chapter. Chapter 686, Your Uncle is Still Your Uncle, Part. Oh, by the way, Weasley, Kadir asked me to tell you that the toilet issue has been resolved, and you can ignore the note he sent. Goldstein announced to Percy before leaving, his earlier intensity completely dissipated. Click. The office door closed, and Atticus Blaine gently guided the stunned Percy back to the coffee table. As soon as Percy sat on the sofa, he sprang up again, his eyes wide with astonishment and anger. You intend to intercede for Ali Bashir, Mr. Blaine? Do you know him? Percy demanded. This is the first time I've heard that name, Percy, Atticus replied, shaking his head slightly. Then why did you promise Goldstein to defend Mr. Crouch when you saw him? You know, Ali Bashir. Atticus raised his hand to interrupt Percy's tirade, speaking calmly. I'm not doing this for Bashir. I'm doing it for you, Percy. After encouraging the bewildered Percy to sit down, Atticus continued slowly. When I met Buddy, I didn't plan to mention it to him. Regarding the flying carpet, I suggest you send a letter to Buddy. If Buddy replies, follow his instructions. If he doesn't, proceed by sending a work letter to the minister's office for guidance. Percy blinked, finally realizing that the situation might be more complex than it seemed. Though he couldn't grasp the logic behind Professor Blaine's solution. Seeing Percy's confusion, Atticus paused briefly but then explained patiently, Behind Ali Bashir is likely Connolly. What? Percy was shocked, his tired mind suddenly clear. He recalled Goldstein's last words and blurted out, But, well, Miss Umbridge. Goldstein mentioned that the Oswald family is responsible for selling flying carpets in the UK. You probably don't know that this family is connected to Mrs. Fudge, right? Atticus, who seemed to have a thorough understanding of the situation, explained, Umbridge was merely covering for Fudge. When was Bashir captured, and when did Percy and Barty start taking leave? Bashir was captured in the middle of last month, and Mr. Crouch took leave 4 days ago, Percy replied dully. And when did Goldstein come to see you? Atticus continued to probe. Yesterday, Percy stammered, as if realizing something. Now that Bashir has been captured for nearly a month, and Barty has been at the Ministry of Magic for most of that time, have you ever considered why, Percy? Goldstein didn't negotiate this matter with Barty while he was here, but instead chose to involve you? Atticus asked, his teaching skills evident. He wanted to use me, Percy said blankly, his cheeks gradually paling, but I didn't let him succeed. The logic of the whole situation is likely this. Atticus interlaced his fingers on his knees. The sale of flying carpets in the UK has a long history, traditionally managed by the Oswald family, which is Minister Fudge's wife's family. However, the ban on flying carpets was enacted during Cornelius Fudge's tenure as Minister of Magic. Who do you think was responsible for that? Percy, once the top student at Hogwarts, opened his mouth, beginning to understand. Understood, the whole affair is a political confrontation between Cornelius Fudge and Barty Crouch. I don't know how Barty managed it, but it likely involved some exchange of interests. They won this confrontation and successfully pushed the flying carpet ban bill through review, Atticus said calmly. But it's clear that Connolly was not satisfied, hence the order, presumably made by Ali Bashir. Atticus Blaine, the Oswald family's white-glove figure, was a man of intrigue and strategy. You could interpret his actions as a provocation or perhaps a strategic move to clear out stockpiles before new legislation took effect. Despite the principal's behavior, Batty did not succumb to this temptation, leading to Bashir's arrest. Goldstein, likely Connolly's man, acted with a certain inspiration. It was during this time that you were managing daily affairs for Batty, which prompted Goldstein to approach you, hoping to test his luck. This is why he never mentioned Umbridge and Oswald in your presence. If successful, Goldstein would undoubtedly gain favor with Connolly, and you would bear the blame, having signed the acquittal order for Batty. Listening to Professor Blaine's reasoning, Percy's heart raced, and he found himself questioning everything. I didn't ruin Mr. Crouch's plans. I didn't sign, Percy muttered, his voice dull. Have you considered that your refusal to sign might offend the Minister of Magic, potentially dooming your career? Atticus Blaine's chuckle sent a chill through Percy, turning his face pale. He opened his mouth, hoping to ask Professor Blaine for help, but his previous thoughts held him back. Just now at the door, Goldstein requested to meet Batty personally. This indicates two things. First, he likely realized you aren't someone he can easily manipulate. Second, he still wants to prove his worth to the minister. It was probably his own idea to approach Batty, hoping to impress him. In that case, Professor, Percy began, not realizing how much his demeanor had shifted. He resembled the eager student he once was, seeking Professor Blaine's guidance at the Three Broomsticks bar with Penelope. Why do you still want to replace him? You neither allowed Goldstein to meet Batty, nor were you willing to sign yourself, This means you'll face Connolly's wrath for Batty. Are you prepared to leverage the Weasley family's influence for this, Percy? Atticus Blaine asked calmly, observing Percy's hesitation. Have you considered that when Goldstein reports to Fudge, he might blame you for the mission's failure? This despicable villain, Percy shouted angrily. I'm going to fight him. His curses against Goldstein were fierce, and Atticus couldn't help but sigh. Arthur had worked at the Ministry of Magic for most of his life, with connections in various departments. Had he never mentioned his son? You can't make decisions on your own, Percy. Understand? Atticus, still seeing Percy as his student, didn't want him to be manipulated. With a guiding spirit, Atticus advised, I suggest you write a letter to Barty seeking permission. If Barty agrees or refuses, the responsibility won't fall on you. Fudge will appreciate your initiative. If not, he has no reason to be angry with you. Additionally, writing a letter protects you. For instance, if Barty tells you Bashir cannot be released but later negotiates differently with Connolly, he might claim you miscommunicated. By then, Bashir would have been in Azkaban for some time. Releasing him then would save the minister's face without appearing weak. The only issue is you might bear some responsibility. Mr. Crouch wouldn't do that, Professor. Percy nearly spat the words, though his expression betrayed his doubt. Politics is a dirty game, Percy. Since you're in it, you shouldn't harbor any illusions, Atticus Blaine concluded, his voice filled with the wisdom of experience. Atticus Blaine spoke solemnly. Of course, if Barty doesn't respond to you, then you should follow the standard procedure and seek guidance from the Minister of Magic on how to handle Bashir. Even if Barty returns, he won't be able to fault you. You've already informed him, so it's not considered bypassing the chain of command. Do you understand, Percy? End of this chapter. Chapter 687. Visit, Professor Blaine, are you truly not considering joining the Ministry of Magic? Percy asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. After Atticus Blaine had explained the entire situation, Percy sat in stunned silence, his expression one of sheer astonishment. When he finally regained his composure, he looked at Professor Blaine with admiration and spoke with great respect. Staying at Hogwarts will only bury your wisdom, Professor Blaine. The Ministry of Magic offers a broader stage. I wager, Professor, that if you choose to work there, the position of minister will be yours sooner or later. The depth of Professor Blaine's wisdom was simply astounding, Percy thought, as he tried to steady himself. With just a few words exchanged between Goldstein and himself, and a subtle hint from Goldstein, Professor Blaine had managed to piece together the truth of the entire situation. He even provided a solution that absolved Percy from blame. Such skill and insight left Percy in awe. He had to admit that even Mr. Crouch couldn't offer him that level of guidance. Everyone has their own ambitions, Percy, Atticus said, rising from the sofa. He wandered into Barty Crouch's office, glancing around with casual interest. You must understand that power comes in many forms. It isn't solely the power held by the Minister of Magic that matters. Atticus turned to face Percy, who sat upright on the sofa, as if attending a lecture, his eyes filled with a strong desire for knowledge. Atticus's gaze softened slightly. Just a reminder, Percy, Atticus continued. If you ever decide to enter politics, there's one thing you must remember. What is it, Professor? Percy asked eagerly. When working in the wizarding government, you must maintain a clear mind and a keen eye to see through various conspiracies. While it may be difficult to avoid or refrain from using them, you must understand that you cannot become reliant on conspiracies to solve problems. Simply put, if you wish to advance, you must work diligently to hone your abilities. Don't expect to reach the top in one step. Atticus's meaningful look made Percy feel a pang of shame. Also, Percy, Atticus added, turning his attention to the paper airplanes floating in the air, I suggest you let Arthur take you around the various departments in the Ministry of Magic to meet his old friends. If you don't want to be stuck in the office all day dealing with meaningless tasks. Dad? Percy asked, first surprised, then confused. What role can he play? Your father is much more capable than you realize. Percy, set aside your arrogance and prejudice. When you encounter problems, seek your father's advice. You will learn a great deal. There was more Atticus could have said. For instance, he could have suggested that Percy consider transferring to another department. working under Barty Crouch was not an ideal choice, especially since Atticus himself supported Amelia. After Voldemort's return and Fudge's departure, Atticus might even publicly support Amelia to ensure her rise to power, which would inevitably lead to efforts to suppress Barty. Percy, having worked under Barty since joining the Ministry, would naturally be associated with him, making it difficult to avoid being caught in the political crossfire. Moreover, Barty's current state was concerning. The scene shifted to a pristine cement road lined with 2 rows of identical single-family villas. The lawns and precious flower beds in the private gardens of each villa were meticulously maintained. The air was filled with the delightful scents of blooming flowers and fresh earth. The Muggles who occasionally passed by carried themselves with an air of confidence and distinction. This was a place located in the southeast of London. At the boundary between the city and the suburbs lies a renowned high-end community. This area is home to many influential Muggle dignitaries. However, these esteemed individuals would be surprised to learn that a deviant wizard resides among them. After a conversation with Perk, while at the Ministry of Magic, Atticus Blaine lingered in London for a few more days, awaiting Barty's response. The recent heavy snowfall had brought cold and damp weather to the city, yet Atticus wore only a simple woolen shirt beneath his dark green, worn coat. This attire drew astonished glances from the occasional passerby. Standing outside Barty's house, Atticus admired the flowers that defiantly bloomed in the cold winter. With a smile, he rang the doorbell. "I have limited mobility, Atticus. Please forgive me for not being able to greet you at the door. Come in on your own," came Barty's slightly hoarse voice through the intercom. Atticus was surprised. As a senior official of the Ministry of Magic, he hadn't expected Barty to use Muggle technology like an intercom. The door's amplifier emitted a clear sound as Atticus turned the handle and entered. In the entrance hall, a pair of brand-new cotton slippers leapt from the shoe rack, hopping in front of him. Atticus obliged, removing his boots and slipping into the slippers. Passing the kitchen, he noticed no signs of cooking, only a trash can overflowing with packaging from Muggle instant products. The corridor leading to the living room featured a photo wall, displaying numerous pictures of Barty with notable figures from the magical world. In nearly every photo, Barty wore a serious expression. However, one photo showed Barty with a thin woman, his expression gentle, while the woman leaned on his shoulder, her face radiating happiness. Both appeared young, likely in their 30s. Atticus noticed this family photo had been cropped, revealing a ring of light yellow hair at the bottom. From the layout and height, it seemed Barty's son had been cut out, possibly because the woman's wedding-ringed hand rested on the boy's head. "There's still a photo with you, Atticus," a voice devoid of emotion called from the dimly lit living room, pulling Atticus from his reverie. He turned to see Barty, wrapped in a thick blanket, rising from the sofa. "If you don't mind, we can take a picture together now, Barty," Atticus suggested. As his gaze met Barty's, a sense of confusion stirred within him, the truth behind it weighing heavily on his heart. Fast food packaging littered the coffee table before Barty, and the unlit fireplace left the room cooler than the outside. "Oh my God!" Atticus exclaimed, his voice heavy with concern. He rushed over to support Barty, helping him sit down. Drawing his wand, he pointed it at the fireplace, igniting a golden flame that quickly warmed the room. By the fire's light, Atticus examined Barty's pale face closely. "You look really unwell, Barty," he remarked. "Cough, cough," Barty responded, withdrawing his arm from Atticus's grasp. After catching his breath, he continued. After taking a deep breath a few times, Atticus Blaine said expressionlessly, "Yeah, I guess it will be the same." He wrinkled his nose, detecting the unmistakable scent of blood, which he realized was emanating from Barty's arm. Atticus placed the gift he had brought, a bottle of mead aged in the finest oak, on the coffee table before taking a seat himself. "I was planning to have a drink with you," he began, his voice tinged with surprise as he noticed the fast food packaging scattered across the table. "But it seems you're not in the mood for wine tasting anymore. Seriously, Barty, I think you should head to St. Mungo's immediately instead of staying in this cold house." End of this chapter. Chapter 688, The Shining Jong Family. The acrid scent of blood mingled with a faint odor of decay. Even without rolling up Batty's sleeves, Atticus Blaine could surmise the condition of the burns on Batty's arms, inflicted by the Hungarian tree peaks. Atticus regarded Batty with the concern of an old friend. "I'm not going to St. Mungo's, Atticus," Batty said, his voice weak and strained, yet maintaining a cold, distant tone. "Those healers at St. Mungo's will only make a fuss. Staying there would be troublesome for me. You understand, right?" Atticus pursed his lips, falling into a brief silence. For a political figure with aspirations of becoming Minister of Magic, maintaining a healthy image was crucial. Rumors of Batty's health issues could undermine his supporters' confidence. "I've prepared some medicine for myself, enough to handle the trouble that beast caused me. As you can see, Atticus, I need rest," Batty said, casting a sideways glance at Atticus, his tone tinged with slight irritation, as if blaming Atticus for disturbing his peace. "But regardless, Batty," Atticus replied, his voice filled with concern, "you need someone to take care of you. Look at the state of this house. There's no firewood in the fireplace, the water in the teapot is ice cold, and the kitchen is cluttered with Muggle junk food. I imagine the laundry room is overflowing with dirty clothes. This environment won't help you recover quickly. Honestly, you should at least find someone to manage your household." Atticus suddenly raised his eyebrows, as if struck by a thought, causing a flicker of wariness in Batty's eyes. "I just remembered something," Atticus said thoughtfully. "The house elf you dismissed is currently working in the kitchen at Hogwarts." Batty was taken aback by Atticus's words and instinctively asked, "You mean Twinkle?" "Yes, Twinkle," Atticus replied, narrowing his eyes. "After you left, the elf led a wandering life until it found its way into the Hogwarts kitchen. But truth be told, it's not happy there. It still longs for the days of serving the Crouch family and misses working for you. Would you consider taking it back? Before everything happened, it took excellent care of you." "It's surprising, Atticus," Batty said, clearly moved by the suggestion but still wary. "It's surprising that a wizard like you would care about the happiness of an expelled elf. If it were Dumbledore, I wouldn't be so surprised." "It's a coincidence," Atticus replied with a cheerful smile. "Some Gryffindor students were sneaking into the school kitchen for a thrill, and I caught them. There was an elf named Dobby who used to serve the Malfoy family. Like Twinkle, he made a mistake and was dismissed. Dobby knows Harry Potter, and he was the one sneaking into the kitchen with his friends. Dobby and Twinkle are friends and joined Hogwarts together." "So," Atticus shrugged, "I learned about this while listening to Harry Potter and his friends confess their crimes." The idea of bringing Twinkle back was indeed tempting, and Atticus Blaine seemed to have made the suggestion unintentionally. His expression was sincere, and it seemed he had stumbled upon the information about Twinkle by chance. After all, how could a wizard like him deliberately paying attention to a humble house elf? Bring back Twinkle. Twinkle was probably the only thing in the house that didn't make Atticus Blaine feel ill. "All right, Atticus, let's do this," Barty said in a low voice after a long hesitation. "It's really difficult for me to handle the current situation alone. If Twinkle is truly still loyal to the Crouch family and genuinely understands its mistakes, I can give it a chance, of course." Barty's eyes bore into Atticus, as if trying to read his very soul. "I accept your proposal, Atticus. At the same time, I hope you can keep this matter confidential. You understand, if word gets out that I've red-mitted Twinkle, with your wisdom, you'll surely grasp how damaging this could be for me." "We're friends, Barty," Atticus replied with a sincere smile. "We have worked together and promoted the Triwizard Tournament together. I would never do anything to harm you. Oh, your elf will certainly be thrilled about this, but you'll have to wait a couple of days, Barty. Only Dumbledore has the authority to release the elves, and he's been away for the past 2 days." Atticus seemed genuinely pleased that Barty accepted his proposal, but his heart suddenly sank. His initial suspicions upon meeting Barty were now confirmed. At that moment, the water in the teapot on the mantelpiece began to gurgle. Atticus walked over, took down the kettle, and rummaged through the shelf above the fireplace. He found only a few black tea bags in a jar. "With the elf's care, I believe you'll recover soon. Barty, Percy will definitely be pleased about this." To prevent the International Magic Cooperation Department from falling into chaos in your absence, he's taken on a lot of responsibility and pressure these days. Atticus dropped the tea bags into 2 cups, then brought them to Barty. Percy? Old Barty looked a bit shocked and paused for a few seconds before responding. You mean Weatherby? Oh, this young man is very enthusiastic, Barty said with a hint of dissatisfaction. Very enthusiastic, but he still lacks experience in handling many issues. Atticus smiled, straightened up, and glanced around. May I use your bathroom, Barty? Oh, follow the corridor, turn left, and it's the second door, Barty replied. As Atticus strolled away and disappeared around the corner, Barty's cheeks twitched subtly, and a trace of imperceptible madness flickered in his eyes. Click. Once the bathroom door closed, Atticus's cheerful demeanor vanished. His face turned solemn, and his penetrating eyes scanned the room. He saw Barty sitting on the sofa, holding a teacup, waiting quietly. Atticus withdrew his gaze from the living room, looked down at his feet, and stared intently with narrowed eyes. After a moment, his form became ethereal, transforming into a shadow that silently slipped beneath the floor. The anti-intrusion magic, looking glass, and other devices in the underground secret room immediately reacted to the intruder. However, before these magical defenses could act, Atticus, who had reappeared, had a sharp look in his eyes. He waved his wand decisively, freezing all magical flows in the secret room and disabling all anti-intrusion facilities. This was Barty's treasure room. The room was as large as a classroom, with more than a dozen bookshelf-style shelves neatly arranged. Each shelf was filled with priceless treasures. Atticus even spotted a golden gem the size of a baby's head mounted on a Nanmu base. Most of the shelves were filled with antiques from various magical civilizations, each with a long history and high research value. On one wall of the secret room, numerous cold weapons hung, gleaming with a chilling light. The room was filled with elegant and beautiful shapes, each piece seemingly crafted by a fairy skilled in the art of creation. At first glance, the collection appeared otherworldly. Atticus Blaine paused for a mere 2 seconds in front of a silver shield, the corners of his mouth twitching slightly. If his memory served him right, this was something that had once passed through his own hands. Ignoring the rest of the room, which was filled with treasures that could drive anyone to madness, Atticus quickly made his way to a dusty wooden box, leaning against the wall. He squinted briefly, assessing the box, before raising his hand to gently touch the lock. End of this chapter. Chapter 689, Accountability. The sealing magic on the lock was peculiar, not typical of a wizard's work. It seemed to be a blend of goblin and elven magic. However, this did not deter Atticus Blaine from his task. With a gentle touch, the seal on the lock froze. After casting a spell to muffle any sound around him, Atticus slowly opened the box. As he peered inside, his expression shifted subtly, and he fell into a contemplative silence. As Atticus had anticipated, the space within the box was unusual, magically expanded. Instead of treasure linked to the city, it contained a room. Wooden stairs descended several meters to the bottom of the box. The room's walls were a dreary light gray, and its furnishings were sparse. A simple oil lamp on a desk, a few hangers with shirts and jeans, a bed, and a toilet. It resembled a solitary confinement cell. However, a blood-stained chain was fastened to the bedpost, likely to ensure the prisoner could move freely within the room. The chain was notably long. The clothes on the hangers appeared to be youthful in style, not something Barty could wear, especially the impeccably ironed little wizard's school uniform. Atticus blinked, recalling the half-torn family photo he had seen upon entering. 5 minutes later, Atticus returned to the living room. His mood had grown somber as he looked at Barty crouch on the sofa. "You've been gone long enough, Atticus. Are you feeling unwell?" Barty's face was still pale, his eyes cold and suspicious as he stared at Atticus, who sat back beside him. "What?" Atticus leaned back against the sofa, curling his lips. "I do feel a bit off. Muggle breakfasts aren't quite to my taste." "Speaking of which, Atticus, why did you have Weatherby write to me and insist on visiting?" Barty's impatience was evident. He eyed Atticus with a sinister expression. "I doubt you went to such lengths just to help a dismissed elf return to his master, right?" "What do you mean, Barty? We're friends, aren't we?" Atticus smiled warmly, seemingly oblivious to the coldness and suspicion in Barty's tone. When I learned that my old friend had health issues so severe he had to leave his job and rest at home, I felt it was only right to visit. Oh, of course. Before Barty could voice his anger, Atticus shifted his tone. The smile vanished from his face, and his previously unfocused eyes sharpened. The heavy aura he projected startled Barty, who nearly reached for his wand, ready to leap away from Atticus. The real reason I came to you is related to the confidentiality of the competition project, Barty, Atticus said gravely. Just a few days ago, while chatting with a colleague, I discovered he already knew the details of the second event of the competition. He mentioned that a Ministry of Magic employee had casually shared this information with him. Atticus's displeasure was evident. We agreed to keep this strictly confidential, didn't we, Barty? We can't let the bad habits from past Triwizard tournaments resurface. We've invested so much effort into the contest project, yet here we are, with nearly 3 months until the second event, and leaks are already rampant. I have reason to suspect that some Ministry of Magic employees. They even exploit their access to insider information to amass fortunes in the gambling market, where the fairies act as dealers. Atticus Blaine's question left Barty momentarily speechless. He hadn't anticipated that Atticus's visit would concern the leaking of championship secrets. This isn't an issue for the Department of International Magical Cooperation, Atticus, old Barty retorted instinctively. I've instructed all officials involved in the competition's planning not to disclose any details. The problem doesn't lie with me. Oh? Atticus inquired, probing further. Are you suggesting, Barty, that the issue might be with Ludo? We're all familiar with Ludo's ways, Atticus, Barty asserted emphatically. I'm neither an Auror from the Ministry of Magic nor an enforcer from the law enforcement squad, Barty. It's not my duty to uncover the truth, Atticus declared, rising to his feet. He gestured animatedly as he paced in front of Barty. The reality is that the Ministry of Magic is leaking crucial information like a sieve. I have no idea if Beauxbatons and Durmstrang have already obtained the specifics of the second task and devised a solution, while Dumbledore and I naively expect the Hogwarts champions to tackle the challenge with their own resourcefulness. If it were up to me, I'd have all involved staff sign a confidentiality agreement. Of course, it might be too late now. So, let's consider altering the second task to ensure the competition's fairness. Barty had been restraining his impatience, listening to Atticus's persistent concerns. However, when Atticus Blaine suggested changing the task's content, Barty's eyebrows shot up, and he instinctively stood. The task's content cannot be altered, Atticus, Barty insisted. Why not, Barty? Atticus narrowed his eyes. We've already bent so many rules in this competition. In mere seconds, Barty formulated a response. We've set age limits for the competitors, allowed Hogwarts to have 2 champions, and broadcast the event across the European wizarding community. Each of these changes has sparked significant criticism, Atticus. If we alter the predetermined task, what will people say? Moreover, you must remember that we've already provided the clues for the second task to the 4 champions. Barty's argument seemed to sway Atticus. He lowered his head, appearing to deliberate. All right, regarding the leaks, Atticus, Barty seized the moment. I'll write to young Weatherby and instruct him to have all staff involved in planning the event sign a magical contract to prevent further leaks. I'll also speak to Ludo about this. But what's the point, Barty? Atticus sighed heavily. The information has already been leaked. I believe many are already aware of it. Can't it at least safeguard the third event, Atticus? Barty suggested, lowering his voice. If you feel the leaks have disadvantaged the Hogwarts champions, Atticus, perhaps you could personally mentor the 2 Hogwarts champions, especially the young girl. I think she shows great promise. Maybe we can still secure a victory in the competition. End of this chapter. Chapter 690, Their Respective Dance Partners, Part 1. As the week before Christmas approached, school classes had come to a halt. Although the teachers had assigned a substantial amount of homework to the 4th grade students for the holidays, Harry had no intention of diving into it just yet. Like everyone else, he was more interested in enjoying the break. Well, that's not entirely accurate. At least Harry, like his classmates in physical education, never forgot the daily running exercises. The earth was still blanketed in a silver coating from the last heavy snowfall, which hadn't completely melted away. Last night, as everything lay quiet, the sky began to release fluttering snowflakes once more. In just a day, the snow on the Quidditch pitch and lawns had piled up to the height of a young wizard's knees. Hermione had suggested completing their running exercises in the morning, but Harry and Ron, wary of the cold, had rejected the idea. Thus, the three of them trudged through the snow, step by step, before dinner. It was less of a run and more of a laborious walk. Fortunately, they weren't the only ones struggling. By the time Harry had finished his trek, having waded through the snow for over 20 minutes, Malfoy appeared, leading Pansy and Astoria away from the castle. Trailing behind them were Crabbe and Goyle, looking reluctant. "Oh, why are those two just standing there?" Ron muttered as they passed Malfoy's group. Harry and Malfoy exchanged glances before both looked away. Ron, standing at the bottom step of the stand, glanced sideways at Crabbe and Goyle, who were shivering with cold, and asked breathlessly, obviously. The snow had even tired Harry, who was accustomed to running and exercising. He tried to steady his breath and said to Ron, "Malfoy must have been provoked by Hermione. I mean, when Hermione mocked him last time in gym class, Malfoy definitely didn't just ignore it." "Humph," Hermione snorted arrogantly. "I'm sure Malfoy had to use a lot of persuasion to drag them out of the warm castle, but he couldn't convince Crabbe and Goyle to be as enthusiastic as you, could he?" "Oh, I'm embarrassed to say that, Hermione," Ron replied with a grin. "Speaking of which, Harry." Ron's playful smile made both Harry and Hermione laugh. However, Hermione quickly stopped smiling and turned to Harry. "Whew, I thought, Harry, after that duel, your relationship with Malfoy would be even worse. But in potions class on Friday, when Professor Snape criticized you for getting the wrong amount of nectar, maybe you didn't notice that Malfoy didn't laugh at you." "Our relationship with Malfoy was terrible in the first year, Hermione," Ron interjected. "As for potions class, I guess that coward Malfoy must have been frightened by Harry. He probably didn't expect that even though he had managed to get the upper hand through cunning tricks, he couldn't intimidate Harry either." Harry didn't entirely agree with Ron's assessment, but he didn't argue. He had noticed that after the duel, his perspective on Malfoy had shifted subtly, though he couldn't quite pinpoint how. As the three of them left the Quidditch pitch and headed towards the castle, they heard some commotion near Beauxbaton's carriage. "Who's probably inviting Fleur to the Yule Ball?" The distance was too great for Harry, who had the best eyesight, to make out the faces of the two people surrounded by students. However, Fleur's hair occasionally flashed silver in the snow, confirming her identity for Harry. "No matter who it is, he won't succeed," Ron said, smacking his lips with an inexplicable tone. "Ever since Professor McGonagall announced the ball, at least 10 boys have been turned down, by Fleur every day." Roger Davis, the captain of Ravenclaw's Quidditch team, had distanced himself from those he deemed losers at noon. Following in her footsteps, I overheard Neville mention that Fleur had only sent a message to Davis. He hadn't even seen her face. Poor guy. Under normal circumstances, Harry might have felt some sympathy for Davis, much like Iran did. After all, he and Davis had faced off on the Quidditch field. However, reflecting on his own experiences left him speechless. Cedric Diggory had publicly invited Cho Chang from Ravenclaw to the Yule Ball during gym class after potions on Friday. Amid the applause of the entire hall, Cho's face turned crimson as she nodded. At that moment, Harry's mind was filled with wild thoughts, like challenging Diggory to a duel. He was convinced he could defeat Diggory and prove to Cho that, while he might not be a warrior, he was no less than Diggory. In the end, he didn't act on his impulsive thoughts, but instead slowly swallowed his bitterness. This incident shattered all of Harry's illusions about the Yule Ball. When Ron asked about his plans, Harry bluntly stated that he didn't intend to find a dance partner. "Are you really not going to bring a pretty girl with you, Harry?" Ron asked casually as they navigated a section of the road under the marble stairs, where frequent trampling had turned the snow into solid ice. The three of them had to be careful not to slip, supporting each other as they went. "Don't worry, Harry," Ron continued. "Even if you're not a warrior, you're still the boy who lived, right? And you're the youngest genius seeker in 100 years. I bet not many girls would turn you down. At least Ginny wouldn't. She's probably been waiting for you to invite her. I don't want to make a fool of myself, Ron, Harry replied, trying to mask the lingering sourness in his heart. The last time I danced was 7 or 8 years ago, in gym class at a Muggle school. If anyone wants to go to the dance with me, she'd better bring 2 extra pairs of dancing shoes. Ron chuckled, but Hermione gave Harry a meaningful look. She was about to say something when a voice called her name from above the marble stairs. "Hey, Hermione Granger!" The sudden call nearly caused the 3 of them to lose their balance. Once they steadied themselves and looked up with irritation, their expressions quickly shifted. Ron and Harry exchanged a glance, and then looked at Hermione, who pursed her lips. "What's the matter, Davis?" Hermione asked calmly, sidestepping Roger Davis's gentlemanly offer of support as she reached the platform. Harry and Ron, understanding the situation, stepped back behind Hermione, their eyes fixed on Davis with clear hostility. People passing through the foyer sensed the tension and paused, watching with interest. "I've been looking for you for a while, Hermione," Davis said, his tone overly familiar, causing Hermione, Harry, and Ron to frown. Their relationship wasn't close enough for such familiarity. In fact, they hadn't spoken at school before today. Davis brushed back his hair with a confident smile. "I'd like to invite you to the Yule Ball with me. What do you say, beautiful Miss Granger? I'm sure if we attend together, we'll cause quite a sensation." For a moment, both Harry and Ron felt an urge to punch Davis. His intentions seemed less than honorable, and he was clearly overstepping his bounds. Fleur had just approached Atticus Blaine at noon, and now he was here to provoke Hermione. His sole intention was to borrow the warrior's fame to bask in the limelight. Harry and Ron were so confident that if Hermione accepted Davis's invitation, they vowed to eat the snails Hagrid raised, alive. "Sorry, Davis," Hermione replied icily. "I've already agreed to go with someone else." Hermione's response left Harry and Ron in a state of shock, exchanging bewildered glances before turning their attention to the back of Hermione's head. As a Hogwarts champion who had achieved the highest score in the first task, Hermione was certainly in high demand. In fact, many had sought her company for the dance, usually seizing the opportunity when her 2 friends were absent. Despite this, Harry and Ron had heard numerous rumors over the past few days. However, due to the sensitivity of the topic, they had maintained a silent agreement not to ask her directly. Yet, when had Hermione found a dance partner? Harry's eyes were filled with genuine surprise and curiosity, while Ron's freckled face showed a flicker of disappointment. Davis, too, was taken aback by Hermione's answer. He paused momentarily, but soon his confident smile returned. "Oh, come on, Hermione. Don't try to fool me. I spoke to your good friend, the so-called crazy girl, and she assured me you hadn't accepted anyone's invitation yet. Perhaps my invitation caught you off guard? Do you need some time to process the surprise?" "I have no idea who this crazy girl you're referring to is, Davis." Hermione's expression grew even colder as she retorted sharply. "My best friend in Ravenclaw is Luna Lovegood." End of this chapter. Chapter 691, Their Respective Dance Partners, Part 1. Hermione's demeanor left little room for doubt. The students observing the scene began to murmur among themselves, casting glances at Roger Davies. Occasionally, a ripple of laughter would break out, causing Roger's expression to falter, his face darkening with embarrassment. All right, Davies said, spreading his hands in a gesture of surrender towards Hermione and shrugging. "What do you say about the dance?" "Hey, man!" Ron interjected, glaring at Roger Davies with a look of disdain. "Are you deaf? Didn't you hear Hermione say she's already accepted someone else's invitation?" "And who might you be?" Roger's attention shifted to Ron, his gaze dismissive as he looked over Hermione's head. His tone was laced with arrogance. "What does this have to do with you?" Ron, never one to back down from a challenge, especially with an audience, felt his cheeks flush a deep red that spread to the tips of his ears. Despite this, he stood his ground, puffing out his chest. "I'm Ron Weasley. Got a problem with that?" he retorted, slightly breathless. "As for the relationship, we're friends, so I think I have the right to protect her from unwanted attention." "That's right, Ron," Harry chimed in, admiration in his voice. He shot a pointed look at Roger, hoping the man would take the hint and leave Hermione alone. Hermione turned to look at the two boys behind her, her lips pressed into a thin line, her brown eyes flickering with emotion. Her gaze lingered on Ron, and a wave of melancholy washed over her. She recalled how, in their first year at Hogwarts, it was Ron's teasing that had drawn her into their little group. Perhaps, she thought, everything was coming full circle. "Friends?" Roger sneered, glancing sideways at Ron. "Just friends. More than just friends." Hermione suddenly declared, turning back to face Roger. Her eyes were fierce, though her voice remained calm. "Ron also invited me to the Christmas ball, and I," she emphasized, "have accepted his invitation." A gust of cold wind swept up the snowflakes from the ground, forcing the students gathered on the marble platform outside the foyer to squint against the flurry. Yet neither Harry nor Ron moved. Harry stared at Ron, dumbfounded, a mix of emotions swirling within him. Ron and Hermione were both his close friends, yet they had kept this from him? But as he noticed Ron's bewildered expression amidst the swirling snow, Harry realized that Hermione's words might not reflect the whole truth. Even without turning around, Hermione could guess Harry and Ron's reactions. In the biting wind, she quickly turned to Ron, her brow furrowed, whispering, "Are you going to react, Weasley?" "React?" Ron shook his head, snapping back to reality. Was he really going to the Yule Ball with Hermione as his partner? But he hadn't invited her. Hermione was his friend, right? Going to the ball with her. Well, she wasn't unattractive, though her temper could be fiery at times. It wasn't out of the question, as long as she didn't mind her vintage ball gown. Ron's heart raced. Was it just his imagination, or had Hermione become more beautiful? Perhaps it was her teeth. He hadn't noticed before, but her front teeth no longer seemed as prominent. In those few seconds, Ron's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. However, Atticus Blaine had no time to dwell on his thoughts because Roger Davis was already eyeing him suspiciously. Ahem. Under the intense scrutiny of Hermione's sharp gaze, Ron blurted out before he could think, "Yes, that's right! I mean, that's it!" He noticed the corners of Harry's mouth twitching into a smile, which only made Ron blush more. Yet, he held Roger Davis's gaze, determined to stand his ground. "I invited her, that's right." Gryffindor's brave Hermione Granger had chosen her dance partner, her good friend Ron Weasley. The surrounding students expressed mild surprise. It wasn't exactly shocking news, as the dance partners of the champions had been a hot topic lately. Most students assume Ed Hermione would attend the ball with either Harry Potter or Ron Weasley, given their close friendship. The surprise stemmed from the expectation that Hermione would choose Harry, who was more famous and, some thought, more handsome than Ron. Roger Davis's face turned a deep shade of red, akin to a pig's liver, having been rejected by two girls in one day. It might have been bearable if it were Fleur Delacour, but Hermione Granger was just an ordinary girl in his eyes. Davis's lips twitched as if he wanted to retort, but Harry's timely, piercing look silenced him. He averted his gaze from Harry and noticed the crowd that had gathered around them. "All right." Roger forced a smile, trying to maintain his dignity. "That's a shame. Well, have fun." With those words, he quickly retreated, disappearing into the crowd and out of sight of Harry, Ron, and Hermione. The conclusion of this little drama was quite theatrical. However, the onlookers seemed slightly disappointed that Roger Davis and Ron Weasley hadn't drawn their wands in a duel over Hermione. A duel would have been thrilling. The students watched the trio with a mix of embarrassment and anticipation, hoping for more excitement. Could it be that two boys were vying for the same girl, threatening their friendship? "Haha, that's really interesting." A string of slightly hoarse laughter broke the awkward silence. All eyes, including those of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, turned to the source of the laughter at the base of the marble steps. It was Fleur Delacour. She had arrived unnoticed, and was now observing the scene with amusement. Fleur navigated the icy steps with care, approaching the trio. Despite the relentless north wind tossing her silver hair, she casually adjusted it. Her smile, captivating to many, was directed at Hermione. "Seriously." Fleur glanced at Ron before returning her gaze to Hermione, who was on guard. "The boy who just left is quite good, isn't he? I heard he's excellent at Quidditch, and quite handsome. Going to the dance with him would be a good choice." "Is it?" Hermione retorted, confident that her dislike for Fleur wasn't merely because they were competitors in the tournament. She simply disliked Fleur's nonchalant demeanor and had heard her express negative opinions about Hogwarts. In that case, why did you reject him? The two female champions of the Triwizard Tournament had no personal rapport. Hermione recalled only one official conversation with Fleur, which was during the time when Harry. In the middle of the night, Hermione, along with Harry and Lee, was sent by Professor Atticus Blaine to deliver an apology. The two of them were only acquaintances. Fleur, however, seemed oblivious to the sarcasm and impatience in Hermione's voice. When Hermione questioned her, Fleur simply tilted her head, feigning contemplation. Her endearing demeanor immediately captured the attention of the young wizards who were watching. Excited murmurs rippled through the crowd, and even Ron appeared momentarily entranced. "Perhaps it's because," Fleur began, after a prolonged pause. Her words were accompanied by a radiant smile that perfectly complemented her flawless features. Her gaze shifted from Hermione to Harry. "I think there are better options." End of this chapter. Chapter 692. A successful hand-holding. Harry was still preoccupied with the fact that Hermione and Ron were attending the Yule Ball together. To be honest, he didn't object to this outcome. Deep down, he had long realized that such a day would come. However, as they prepared for this special dance, Harry's heart was a whirlwind of mixed emotions. Cho Chang's adorable face kept popping into his mind unexpectedly. In short, Hermione's dilemma was resolved, but Harry found himself lost in his own world, his mood clouded. He barely paid attention to the conversation between Hermione and Fleur, only hearing a persistent buzzing in his ears that made him impatient and eager to escape the current environment. Suddenly, the noise in his ears ceased, and the atmosphere around him became noticeably tense. Harry immediately became alert. "What's happening?" he wondered. To his surprise, he found that everyone's eyes were on him, including Ron, Hermione, and some young wizards who were watching with interest. Even Fleur was looking at him with a smile. "Did something happen?" Harry asked nervously, feeling a bit lost. "Oh, nothing," Fleur replied, gracefully stepping around Hermione to approach Harry. Before anyone else could speak, she smiled and said, "Harry?" Just hearing Fleur call his name sent shivers down Harry's spine. It wasn't just because Fleur still had traces of her French accent, but also because her tone carried an unexpected intimacy. "I assume you haven't agreed to go to the Yule Ball with anyone else yet?" she asked. "What?" Harry responded, still bewildered. He instinctively told the truth. "Oh, no!" Hermione finally gave up trying to signal Harry with her eyes. She pursed her lips tightly, resembling Professor McGonagall catching a student daydreaming in class, while Ron's mouth hung open wide enough to swallow 2 eggs. "Then will you accept my invitation, Harry?" Fleur asked, her smile radiant. As those watching had anticipated, she extended an invitation to Harry Potter. Although the young wizards had expected this, when Fleur actually said it, there was a collective gasp, and it felt as if hearts were breaking all around. If there was a most popular girl at Hogwarts, it was undoubtedly Fleur Delacour, the Beauxbatons champion. Since Ollivander had checked the wands for the champions, it was no secret that Fleur had Vila blood. She perfectly embodied all the admirable traits of a Vila, a magical creature known for its beauty. In terms of figure and appearance, no girl at Hogwarts could compare to her. Moreover, she was a brave warrior, having demonstrated her courage and talent in the first task against the dragon. Aside from her somewhat arrogant personality, she had almost no flaws. Which young wizard could refuse such a perfect girl? The young wizards watching cast envious glances at Harry, secretly wishing they had his luck. Harry noticed Ron winking at him, understanding his friend's encouragement. However, he didn't agree immediately. Instead, he frowned slightly, looking at Fleur with confusion. It would be a lie to say Harry didn't feel a bit pleased. How could a boy his age be completely immune to vanity? The dance partners of the champions were a hot topic among the students, and Fleur Delacour and Victor Crumb's partners were the center of attention. Most of the boys and girls at Hogwarts dreamed of attending the ball with these two esteemed individuals. After Cho Chang agreed to go with Cedric, even Harry had fleeting thoughts about what it would be like if Fleur, the favorite among the boys, had appeared together, gracing everyone with a beautiful dance. Would Cho Chang possibly regret her impulsive decision? But why? Harry finally asked, and Fleur seemed to have been waiting for this moment. She immediately replied, "Remember, Harry, on the night I arrived at Hogwarts, you gave me a plate of fish soup and directed me to a certain professor's office." Hermione coughed loudly, though it sounded more like a derisive snort. However, Fleur paid her no mind. Even Harry only glanced at Hermione briefly before turning back to Fleur, still puzzled. If this was the reason Fleur wanted to invite him to the ball, then perhaps Roger Davis had been a bit hasty in his assumptions. "Remember, Harry, you also gave me a beautiful dress," Fleur continued with a smile. "I like that dress very much, Harry. I plan to wear it to the ball." "That dress is," Harry began to explain, but Fleur interrupted him. "It was you who made me feel that Hogwarts was friendly and welcoming, Harry. So would you like to go to the ball with me?" Harry stammered, his mind a whirl of confusion. To be honest, after Cho Chang had been swept away by Cedric, he had lost interest in the Yule Ball. The thought of seeing Cho dancing with Cedric was too much, and he had even considered not attending at all. However, the fact that Hermione and Ron were planning to go together had stirred something within him. Harry blinked, looking at Fleur, who was smiling warmly at him. His heart skipped a beat. He had to admit, Fleur's beauty was undeniable, and going with her would certainly be a good choice. "What are you waiting for, Harry?" Ron finally burst out, unable to contain himself. He grabbed Harry's arm and shook it vigorously. "Hurry up and agree!" "Ron," Hermione scolded sternly, "you shouldn't interfere if Harry doesn't want to." "Okay, I do," Harry said, cutting her off. His words immediately drew a glare from Hermione, but he was too focused on Fleur's radiant smile to notice. "But I have to say, I'm not very good at dancing. I might make a fool of myself." "It's okay, Harry," Fleur reassured him kindly. "I'm quite good at it. I'll give you some pointers." "Potter, Granger, Weasley, you're here." They had been blocking the door for quite some time. More and more young wizards were streaming into the Great Hall for dinner. Even Malfoy and his cronies had returned to the castle and stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching the scene with cold detachment. As Harry was saying goodbye to Fleur, Professor McGonagall's voice suddenly echoed from the top of the stairs in the foyer. She hurriedly descended the steps, frowning as she squeezed through the crowd. "What happened? Why are you all stuck here instead of going to dinner?" Upon reaching the trio, Professor McGonagall muttered a relieved "thank God" under her breath. "Oh, sorry, Professor, we were just heading to dinner," Harry said, slightly nervous, thinking she was reprimanding them for blocking the entrance. "Oh, sorry, Mr. Potter, Miss Granger, Mr. Weasley," Professor McGonagall addressed them sternly. "I'm afraid your dinner will have to wait. Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine have important matters to discuss with you. They're waiting in the headmaster's office." Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine were back? Harry and Hermione exchanged surprised glances, quickly followed by a wave of anxiety. What important matters could they possibly have to discuss? The trio exchanged worried looks, their minds racing to recall if they had inadvertently caused any new trouble recently. "Don't dawdle. Come with me," Professor McGonagall instructed, waving them forward. Without waiting for a response, she turned and led the way. The curious young wizards scattered under her stern gaze, hurrying into the auditorium for dinner. "Have we gotten into trouble recently?" Harry asked nervously, trailing behind Professor McGonagall. He turned to Hermione, who seemed reluctant to speak with him. Before Hermione could respond, Fleur, standing nearby, suddenly called out, "Hey, Harry!" Harry turned to see Fleur still smiling at him, though her smile now seemed less warm and more strained, as if she were forcing it through clenched teeth. "When you see Atticus Blaine," she said, "let him know that we're already dance partners, okay?" End of this chapter. Chapter 693, Professor McGonagall's Sense of Honor. Harry and Ron exchanged glances, easily recognizing that Hermione was upset for no apparent reason. Professors Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine had been away from the school for several days. Upon their return, they promptly summoned the trio to the headmaster's office, with Professor McGonagall delivering the message. Naturally, this piqued their curiosity. As they ascended the stairs, Harry pondered their recent behavior. They had been relatively well-behaved and hadn't broken any school rules. except for the duel with Malfoy. However, it seemed unlikely that Professor Blaine would summon them over that incident. If he intended to reprimand them, Malfoy would have been called as well. Moreover, Professor Blaine had the authority to discipline them without involving Professor Dumbledore. Unless, of course, it was related to the events in the kitchen that night. Professor Blaine had instructed them to keep their extraordinary experiences a secret, except if Dumbledore inquired. Professor McGonagall led the way, making it difficult to engage in a detailed discussion. Harry quickened his pace to catch up with Hermione, giving her a knowing look, but she ignored him and instead approached Professor McGonagall. When did Professors McGonagall, Dumbledore, and Blaine return? Hermione inquired. Just a few hours ago, Miss Granger, Professor McGonagall replied. Her steps were brisk, forcing the three students to trot to keep up. Sensing the anxiety of the troublemakers from her house, she glanced at Hermione. I don't know why Albus and Atticus have summoned you. I asked, but they wouldn't tell me. At this, Professor McGonagall's expression darkened slightly, her voice tinged with frustration as she muttered to herself. Oh, it's always like this. They're often nowhere to be found. When they're at school, they stay holed up in their offices. I sent a note, and it took a week to get a reply. It wasn't like this when Atticus first joined the school. Now he's just like Albus, indifferent to the school and the Christmas party. Speaking of the party, Miss Granger. Professor McGonagall paused, her gaze shifting to Hermione. I'm sure you haven't forgotten that as a champion, you and your partner will lead the dance at the banquet start, correct? A blush spread across Hermione's cheeks, and Ron, walking beside Harry, ducked his head guiltily. I remember, Professor McGonagall, Hermione replied in a barely audible voice. Very good, Professor McGonagall nodded approvingly. Who is your dance partner? Is it a boy from Hogwarts? Yes, Professor. Hermione bit her lower lip. I plan to go with Ron. Oh, Professor McGonagall raised her eyebrows in surprise, glancing at Ron, who shrank further into himself. She then smiled at him. 2 Gryffindor students, very good. Miss Granger, I look forward to your performance, but I must remind you both to maintain your decorum. If you embarrass Gryffindor House, I will be very displeased. Though her tone was gentler than in class, her warning made Ron shiver. And what about you, Mr. Potter? Professor McGonagall continued, turning her head as she walked. I hope Gryffindor House will present itself with grace and friendliness to our guests. If you haven't found a dance partner yet, perhaps you could consider inviting someone from Beauxbatons or Durmstrang. Harry, following Ron's lead, nodded in understanding. Atticus Blaine shrank his head, still feeling that the events in the hall seemed somewhat surreal. Harry fervently hoped Hermione wouldn't report the incident to Professor McGonagall. However, Hermione shot him a look that left him puzzled and slightly irritated. He couldn't quite understand what had upset her. Was it simply because Hermione didn't like Fleur and was displeased to see him accept Fleur's invitation? Regardless, Hermione answered the question for him in a dry tone. Harry has accepted someone else's invitation, Professor McGonagall. It's Fleur Delacour. Who? Professor McGonagall's steps faltered, and she asked in surprise. After pausing, she quickly glanced at the 2 cowering boys before adding in a surprised voice. The champion from Beauxbatons, she invited you, didn't she, Mr. Potter? Harry smiled awkwardly. Yeah, that's right, Professor. Just now in the foyer. Professor McGonagall was momentarily stunned, then realized what had caused the commotion in the hall. Her gaze swept over Harry, Hermione, and Ron, finally settling back on Harry with a genuine smile. Very good, Mr. Potter. I think you must have made the Durmstrang warriors feel the warmth and hospitality of Hogwarts. Her spirits lifted, and she walked forward with excited steps, muttering something under her breath that left the 3 of them a bit dumbfounded. Okay, so 3 Gryffindor students will show up at the dance. For Hermione and Ron, this was their first visit to Professor Dumbledore's office. Although Harry had described it to them before, as they approached, their nerves took hold once more. They couldn't help but wonder why Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine had summoned them. Go ahead. After Professor McGonagall recited the password to the 2 intimidating stone gargoyles, a wooden door appeared before them. She smiled encouragingly. Albus and Atticus wouldn't have called you here for anything bad, or they would have informed me." With that, she departed, leaving them to watch her retreating figure as she muttered excitedly, "I must tell Phileas and Pomona about this." With a creak, Hermione, Harry, and Ron entered the mysterious headmaster's office one by one. To the young wizards, the term headmaster's office carried an air of majesty and solemnity. Once inside, Harry stood obediently by the door, his curiosity tempered by caution. "Ah, come here quickly." It wasn't until Professor Blaine's gentle voice beckoned from the innermost part of the circular office that the trio dared to step forward. They moved cautiously across the short distance, mindful of their behavior despite Professor McGonagall's reassurances. Harry resisted the urge to greet Fawkes, the phoenix who had once saved his life. Hermione refrained from examining the tinkling silver instruments, while Ron was momentarily captivated by an old wizard with white hair and a beard in a portrait on the wall. The redhead in the painting was a Weasley ancestor, which caught Ron's attention and left him momentarily stunned. "Professor Dumbledore, Professor Blaine." Professor Dumbledore sat in his chair, smiling softly at them, with Professor Blaine mirroring his expression. This eased the tension in the trio's hearts, allowing them to focus on other details, such as the fact that both great wizards appeared travel-worn, as if they had just returned from a long journey. In the center of the slender-legged desk sits a wide, flat, and hollow stone basin. Mysterious Saxon runes are intricately carved around its rim. Within the basin lies a fascinating substance, simultaneously resembling both liquid and gas. It gleams like bright silver, yet it flows continuously, rippling like water in a gentle breeze and spreading out like clouds. "I'm sorry to call you here during such a lovely dinner hour," Atticus Blaine said with a warm smile. "There are some matters that Professor Dumbledore and I feel it is necessary to discuss with you personally." End of this chapter. Chapter 694. Goo. I think there's no need for us to be so reserved, right? This isn't the Inquisition of the Wizengamot, Atticus Blaine remarked with a gentle smile, observing the three silent students before him. "Unless, of course, the three of you got up to some big things while Principal Dumbledore and I were away from school." Harry's face turned pale, and he trembled slightly, unable to meet Professor Blaine's gaze. Even Ron and Hermione shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Despite their efforts to appear nonchalant, their unease was glaringly obvious to both Dumbledore and Atticus. Dumbledore stroked his beard, looking slightly exasperated, while Atticus sighed inwardly. It seemed futile to expect these three to stay out of trouble. "Let's sit down and talk," Dumbledore suggested, his tone reassuring. "As long as Harry and the others haven't blown up the school, everything else can be managed." With a flick of his wand, Atticus conjured 3 round stools with slender legs, which appeared in front of Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "As Professor Blaine mentioned, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, we need to understand certain events," Dumbledore continued gently. "The truth likely lies in past occurrences, and you three are the only ones who experienced it firsthand. So, Professor Blaine and I must intrude on your dinner time." Harry, facing Dumbledore's kind smile, felt a mix of admiration and confusion. Before the second semester of his second year, Dumbledore had been the wizard he admired most. However, since Professor Blaine's arrival at Hogwarts, Dumbledore's presence seemed to have diminished, and Harry rarely had private conversations with him. Nonetheless, Dumbledore remained one of the wizards Harry respected deeply. He would never forget how, in his first year, Dumbledore's extraordinary wisdom had prevented the Philosopher's Stone from falling into the hands of Quirrell, who was under Voldemort's control. Neither Dumbledore nor Atticus expected all 3 students to speak at once, so Atticus addressed them directly. "I believe you remember the night of the Quidditch final this summer quite vividly. I'm not referring to the riot, but what happened afterward." Harry blinked, momentarily confused, but Hermione quickly caught on. Out of habit, she raised her hand timidly. "If you mean after we left Sirius's tent and went to the Quidditch field to find Harry's wand, we encountered the Dark Mark." Her expression turned hopeful. "Are you and Professor Dumbledore going to clear Winky's name?" "You could say that, Hermione," Atticus replied, pursing his lips. "But first, Professor Dumbledore and I need to hear all the details of that night. So, who would like to start?" The prospect of Dumbledore and Professor Blaine clearing Winky's name seemed almost as miraculous as Hagrid finally realizing the blast-ended Scroot was a dangerous creature. Harry and Ron hesitated, but Hermione, ever perceptive, was eager to speak. "Winky was wronged, Professor. That night." Hermione paused, taking a few deep breaths to steady her excitement, then continued with a slightly trembling voice. "After you left the tent, we planned to rest, but Harry noticed his wand was missing, so—" "Tell me what happened after you returned to the Quidditch pitch, Hermione," Atticus interjected firmly. "All right," Hermione grumbled, a hint of dissatisfaction in her voice, before continuing her account. Atticus Blaine took a deep breath and spoke quickly under the watchful eyes of Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine. "Using Harry's invisibility cloak, we managed to bypass the Ministry of Magic's blockade in the woods and entered the Quidditch pitch. We found no one there, and the pitch was severely damaged. Without wasting time, we made our way to the box where we had stayed that night. The stairs were in disarray, and Harry thought it might be too dangerous for all three of us to go up, so he decided to go alone." Harry glanced at Hermione with a hint of sadness, thinking that such details didn't need to be so explicitly described. "We had a bit of a disagreement, and just as we were discussing our next move, a voice suddenly spoke." "A voice?" Dumbledore interlaced his fingers and rested his chin on them, asking with great interest, "You mean you heard the sound of a curse, Hermione? What did it sound like?" Hermione blinked, not fully grasping Professor Dumbledore's question, but Ron raised his trembling hand. His expression was slightly frightened, as if he had been transported back to that night, startled by the ominous voice among the ruins. "It sounded painful. Probably hurt," Ron said. "Anything else, Ron?" Atticus asked gently. Ron frowned, trying to recall. The voice sounded like an adult's, but not too old. It definitely wasn't the voice of the house elf named Winky. Atticus turned to look at Dumbledore, who then nodded at Hermione to continue. "After the sound of the curse, we saw a green flash flying out from the box where we had been watching the game, forming a pattern in the air. I recognized it. It was the pattern described in the book, the Mark of the Dark Lord," Hermione continued, taking a breath. "The Ministry of Magic officials reacted quickly. They appeared in about 20 seconds, assuming we were the ones who had conjured the dark mark and attacked us. Fortunately, Ron's father recognized us. Then, the Ministry officials interrogated us about why we were there and how we had escaped the blockade." As Hermione spoke, Harry's memory became clearer. He recalled that the wizard who had taken Winky out of the box and found his wand was named Amos. "What was Barty's reaction?" Dumbledore interrupted Hermione again. "I mean, when he discovered that the elf Amos found was Winky." "Mr. Crouch was shocked. He couldn't believe it was Winky, so he immediately apparated into the box after Winky was discovered," Hermione said angrily, recalling the unfair treatment Winky had suffered that night. "Mr. Crouch probably thought Winky should have evacuated like everyone else, but in reality, Winky was just following his orders. Crouch had instructed Winky to stay in the top box to hold a place for him. Winky couldn't disobey this order, so it stayed there, and Mr. Crouch didn't even acknowledge that it was afraid of heights." "Was Barty in that box when you arrived, Atticus?" Dumbledore asked, his keen perception picking up on something. But before Professor Blaine could answer, Harry interjected, "No, Professor Dumbledore, Mr. Crouch's seat was empty the entire time." End of this chapter. Chapter 695, Murderous Intent. "You mean Barty didn't attend the game, but he instructed Winky to secure a seat in the box for him, correct? How do you know all this, Harry?" Dumbledore's penetrating gaze momentarily left Harry speechless. Regaining his composure, Harry nodded and replied, "Before the game, when I entered the box, I quickly noticed Winky. At first, I thought it was Dobby, Professor. House elves tend to look quite similar." Dumbledore nodded in understanding, prompting Harry to continue. "As it happened, Winky and Dobby were acquainted, so we chatted briefly. Winky shared some things about Dobby and then mentioned its own situation with Mr. Crouch. It told me that Mr. Crouch had sent it to the box to reserve a seat." Harry addressed Professor Dumbledore, but glanced at Professor Blaine with a hint of confusion. "Winky is currently working in the kitchen. If you want to know more about that mark, why not summon it here?" We'll speak with Winky once we have a clearer picture, Harry, Atticus Blaine interjected. He paused for a moment before asking, so up until the riot began and during the game, Barty didn't come to the box, correct? Did you notice this? Or is it possible he slipped in unnoticed? Atticus expected Harry to hesitate or ponder the question, but to his surprise, Harry answered promptly, No, Professor Blaine, Mr. Crouch never entered the box. My seat was near the entrance, so anyone entering would have passed by me. I didn't see anyone come in after the game started. There was only a brief moment of uncertainty for Harry during the few seconds when the Bulgarian mascot performed its dance. However, Harry doubted that Crouch had entered then, as Mr. Weasley and the Minister of Magic were present in the box. If Mr. Crouch had walked in, they surely wouldn't have ignored it. Well, Atticus nodded thoughtfully. So, in other words, Winky occupied 2 seats at the time. It sat in one, leaving the other empty. During the game, did anyone occupy this empty seat? Harry was uncertain about this. Logically, there were no standing tickets in the box. Everyone had an assigned seat. The distinguished figures in the magical world present at the time wouldn't act improperly. However, the game was thrilling, and many people left their seats to cheer. Who could guarantee they didn't end up in the wrong spot? Harry glanced at Hermione and Ron, but his friends also wore hesitant expressions, unsure of the answer. Please continue, Hermione, Professor Dumbledore encouraged, unfazed by Professor Blaine's probing questions. He gestured for Hermione to speak. Hermione took a deep breath and, after a brief pause, began recounting the events. She detailed Barty Crouch's disbelief upon returning from the box, Amos's interrogation of Winky, Winky's dismissal by an irate Crouch, and how Mr. Arthur escorted them back to Sirius' tent. She recounted every detail. Throughout her narrative, Professors Dumbledore and Blaine refrained from asking further questions, seemingly having reached a firm conclusion on the matter. Very well, Hermione, Dumbledore said approvingly once she finished. And Harry and Ron, thank you for providing such valuable insights. Your information has been instrumental in resolving our confusion. Dumbledore's praise pleased Harry, Hermione, and Ron, though it also left them somewhat bewildered. Excuse me, Professor Dumbledore, Professor Blaine, Hermione began, her voice tinged with unease. Do you think what we just discussed will help clear Winky's name? I mean, will the Ministry of Magic issue a certificate of innocence for her? Hermione asked. It doesn't need to be that complicated, Hermione. Atticus Blaine replied with a slight smile. As long as Professor Dumbledore, Mr. Crouch, and I believe Winky is innocent, there won't be any issues. Atticus glanced at the clock on the wall and added apologetically, Sorry for keeping you so long. Hurry along, Harry, Hermione, Ron. Head to the Great Hall quickly. You should still have time to eat. In this cold, wet air, you need a full stomach to sleep well. Harry, Hermione, and Ron stood up, still a bit bewildered. They had been summoned to the headmaster's office by Professor McGonagall in a rush, expecting something significant. Instead, they found themselves recounting the events surrounding the Dark Mark that had appeared above the Quidditch World Cup grounds. While the Dark Mark was indeed a serious matter, Harry felt it wasn't something that would usually demand such immediate attention from Dumbledore and Professor Blaine, especially after so much time had passed. The trio left the office as confused as they had entered. As they passed the golden perch where Fawkes the Phoenix sat, Harry suddenly stopped, a thought striking him. He turned back to see Professor Blaine still standing by Dumbledore's desk, watching them leave, seemingly in no hurry to depart. Did you remember something important, Harry? Atticus asked, raising an eyebrow. Oh, it's not about the Dark Mark, Professor, Harry replied, hesitating before deciding to share Fleur's request. After all, he had agreed to be her dance partner and felt obliged to pass on her message. It's about Beauxbaton's champion, Fleur Delacour. She asked me to let you know that we're dance partners for the Yule Ball. Harry's face flushed with embarrassment as he stammered out the message, then dashed out of the office as if he were on his firebolt, not giving Professor Blaine a chance to respond. Atticus stood there for a moment, then chuckled to himself. Fleur had asked Harry to be her partner at the Yule Ball. He shook his head, amused by the unpredictability of it all. But he quickly set the thought aside, ready to discuss more pressing matters with Dumbledore. However, when he turned back, he found Dumbledore watching him with a twinkle of curiosity. "What's on your mind, Headmaster Dumbledore?" Atticus asked, frowning slightly, signaling his reluctance to delve into the topic. "It's intriguing, Atticus," Dumbledore said with a knowing smile. "Didn't you ask Miss Fleur Delacour to be your dance partner, only to be turned down?" Atticus's expression darkened slightly, aware that Dumbledore was teasing him. "Perhaps the truth is quite the opposite of what you think, Headmaster." "Oh, really?" Dumbledore's silver eyebrows arched, his smile unwavering. "What a shame. I've always thought Miss Fleur Delacour was quite charming, and she seems to have taken a liking to you. So, who will have the honor of dancing with you at the ball, Atticus?" Before Atticus could respond, Dumbledore feigned surprise and continued, "Oh, could it be Professor Moody? Honestly, that would be an interesting choice." "Let's focus on discussing Barty Crouch Jr., Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus interjected, steering the conversation back to more serious matters. The chapter concludes with a face shrouded in darkness, exuding a chilling aura of murderous intent. Chapter 696, Restoring the Truth. Perhaps Atticus Blaine and Dumbledore had long been partners in scaling the metaphorical mountain called magic, or perhaps they had joined forces against Voldemort, sharing many of his secrets. In any case, Dumbledore was far more candid with Atticus than with others, despite his usual display of humor and wit. This wasn't the first time Dumbledore had jested about such matters, just as Atticus had teased him about the rumors surrounding his past with Gellert Grindelwald. Yet they maintained a mutual understanding, skimming the surface without delving too deep. This time, however, was different. Atticus appeared uneasy, eager to steer the conversation back to the pressing issue at hand. Surprisingly, Dumbledore did not follow Atticus's lead. "Consider it satisfying the curiosity of a centenarian, Atticus," Dumbledore said, observing Atticus's perplexed expression. "Why do you resist the wonderful notion of love? Please, don't use studying magic as an excuse. I understand the allure of magic, but it doesn't conflict with embracing love, does it? You're not a wizard lacking courage, Atticus. You dared to raise your wand against me in your 5th year, something most adult wizards wouldn't dare. With all due respect, even Tom was more open in this regard. From what I know, he was close to a girl 2 years his senior during his time at Hogwarts. Of course, it was all a facade. He remained cold to everyone. But at least he wasn't afraid of interacting with girls his age due to his parents' tragic love story." Fawkes, the phoenix, let out a melodious cry from his golden perch, and the portraits on the walls perked up, displaying keen interest. Atticus Blaine. When it came to Dumbledore, there might not be a wizard in the European wizarding world who could surpass him for a century. Hearing gossip about him in his youth was even more tantalizing than tales of Voldemort. "I thought we were discussing," Atticus began, maintaining a calm demeanor, but Dumbledore interrupted. "Barty Crouch Jr. being alive is indeed the most bizarre news I've heard this year, Atticus. But considering Tom's survival over the years, the fate of anyone who followed him is bound to be tragic. It's not inconceivable for a Death Eater to be alive. As for Barty and his son, my concern lies more with you." Dumbledore's smile faded, replaced by genuine concern. His blue eyes, peering over his half-moon glasses, reflected his worry for Atticus. "You can accept familial affection. I'm referring to the late, respectable old man from the orphanage where you were raised. Perhaps Severus counts as well. You embrace friendship with Remus, Sirius, Minerva, Phileas, Pomona, Molly, and Arthur. You have strong bonds with many. For your students, you genuinely care. But what is it that truly frightens you?" What was he afraid of? Atticus understood that Dumbledore's question wasn't an attempt to pry into his secrets. Dumbledore was no ordinary wizard. He was an idealist, and his greatness had its reasons. Atticus knew Dumbledore's concern stemmed from genuine care for him, a centenarian wizard, seasoned and wise, worried about a gifted junior. But what could he say? What was he afraid of? The truth was, Atticus hailed from another world, a time traveler. This was the final barrier between him and the world, his personal demon, and its uniqueness was evident. In his cautious approach to love, Atticus Blaine found himself in a perplexing situation. If there were truly a divine perspective observing his past life and current circumstances, it would likely be bewildering. Even if Atticus were to confide in Dumbledore about his origins from another world, As long as he refrained from revealing that this world was merely a book in his previous existence, nothing would change. But is that truly the case? The sense of detachment experienced by someone who has traversed time and space into a new world is something outsiders cannot fully comprehend. Although Atticus was firmly convinced that he was in a real world, a lingering cautio, and in the depths of his mind, constantly reminded him, what if this world was an illusion? What if the girl he allowed himself to love wholeheartedly was nothing more than a phantom? This fear, though seemingly intangible, was deeply ingrained in Atticus's soul, making it difficult for him to escape its grasp. Atticus leaned back in the soft chair, his gaze lowered to the floor. He believed he was calm, yet the pain and vulnerability subtly revealed in his eyes left Dumbledore momentarily stunned. Dumbledore frowned, studying the young man before him. Only then did he realize that the anguish hidden within Atticus's heart was far greater than he had imagined. From the first moment he had set his sights on this boy years ago, he had noticed Atticus's extraordinary ability to control his emotions, far surpassing his peers. In all those years, the most out-of-control emotions Dumbledore had witnessed in Atticus were perhaps that night in his 5th year. Just as others often perceived Dumbledore as omnipotent, Atticus's long-standing emotional restraint had led Dumbledore to believe that his mind was flawless. However, the current situation shattered that perception. In a moment of confusion, Dumbledore even thought he saw a reflection of Severus Snape upon learning of Lily's death many years ago. Atticus! Dumbledore's voice was thick with concern, but Atticus raised a hand to halt him. Please, stop trying to uncover the reasons for my emotional resistance, Dumbledore. Atticus spoke, his voice hoarse like a traveler parched from days in the desert. Yet, Dumbledore detected a resolute tone within it. Thank you for your concern, Headmaster Dumbledore. What I need you to understand is that, firstly, I am fully aware of the problem. Secondly, you cannot assist me in this matter, so let's return to the topic at hand, shall we? A long silence ensued, stretching as if it would last until the end of time. In the grand and solemn circular office, only the flickering candlelight from the chandeliers above seemed to move. From what Harry, Hermione, and Ron have shared, I believe we are in agreement, Dumbledore continued. Atticus, on that night in the box, Barty Crouch Jr. was seated next to Winky. Barty Sr. likely used magic to control his son's actions and instructed Winky to watch over him. However, when the riot began, Winky must have encountered some mishap, preventing her from taking young Barty away in time. Unfortunately, it was then that young Barty broke free from his father's control. Dumbledore understood that it was no longer appropriate to delve into Atticus's resistance to love. He sighed inwardly, regretful, and smoothly transitioned the conversation to Barty Crouch and his son. Barty Crouch Jr., like Winky, must have sustained serious injuries from your magic. Consequently, after conjuring the dark mark, he fell back into the box before Amos entered to investigate. Before that, he likely concealed himself with what I suspect was an invisibility cloak. However, Barty Sr. knew his son was still in the box and had broken free, prompting him to rush in and restrain Barty Crouch Jr. The problem now is... Atticus exhaled deeply, cleared his throat, and, in a hushed tone, Atticus Blaine pondered, was Barty Sr. later controlled by the imperious curse because Barty Jr. managed to break free from its hold again, or were there other factors at play? You and I both understand old Barty's methods, Atticus, Dumbledore replied. After discovering that the magic controlling his son had failed once, he would never allow the same mistake to happen again. Still, he was acutely aware that if this situation became public, not only would his career be utterly ruined, but he would also spend the rest of his life in Azkaban. He would likely employ the most powerful magic he knew to ensure his son could never escape again. I suspect Voldemort found him. Both men were among the world's most astute wizards, their minds sharp and their communications seamless. After a brief moment of contemplation, Atticus pieced together the puzzle. During the brief period when young Barty broke free, did he manage to send a message to Voldemort, letting him know he was still alive? But what about the dark mark? I concur with your assessment, Dumbledore sighed. I imagine Tom would be overjoyed to learn that a Death Eater loyal to him was still alive and not locked away in Azkaban. If possible, he would likely have wanted Barty Crouch Jr. to take his place. Miss Cleona became Alastor, but unfortunately, at that time, young Barty was gravely injured and unable to complete such a challenging task. End of this chapter. Chapter 697. You can start your family now. After unraveling the truth behind the Dark Mark incident on the night of the Quidditch final, both Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine fell into a contemplative silence. The human heart is a mysterious entity. One can never truly see into another's soul. Barty Crouch Sr. was renowned in the British wizarding community for his uncompromising stance against crime and dark magic. During the war, he was the first to advocate for a ruthless approach towards Death Eaters, granting Aurors the authority to kill without prior approval under special circumstances. His ambition for power was no secret, and he had long aspired to become the Minister of Magic. If not for the scandal that marred his reputation, Cornelius Fudge might never have ascended to that position. Yet, this seemingly cold and powerful man risked everything to save his son? Dumbledore shared with Atticus the memory of the moment Barty Crouch Jr.'s identity was revealed and his subsequent trial. In the courtroom, Barty Sr.'s palpable resentment towards his Death Eater son was genuine. Who could have imagined that he would secretly defy societal scorn to save him? How do you think Barty Sr. managed to rescue Barty Crouch Jr. from Azkaban, Atticus? Dumbledore asked, his gaze fixed on the candlestick hanging from the ceiling. That's a tough question, Atticus replied, rubbing his face warily. From the moment Barty Crouch Jr.'s identity was exposed until the Wizengamot completed his trial, Barty Sr. had no opportunity to act. Although I wasn't there, I imagine countless eyes were watching his every move, ensuring he couldn't rescue his son. Barty Sr. personally oversaw the trial and declared that Barty Crouch Jr. would be imprisoned in Azkaban permanently. According to Wizengamot procedures, several Aurors would escort Barty Jr. to Azkaban via the Department of Mysteries portkey. Unless he convinced those Aurors, it was impossible. Therefore, he must have waited until Barty Jr. was officially imprisoned to act. Dumbledore nodded after a moment of silence. I agree, Atticus. Barty likely seized the opportunity during a visit. No one would stop an official, who had lost his chance to become minister, from visiting the child he once cherished. This was the only plausible explanation they could offer. The specifics could only be uncovered by interrogating Barty Crouch and his son, or perhaps the loyal house elves of the Crouch family. However, dwelling on this seemed futile, as Barty Crouch Jr. appeared to be alive, and Barty Sr. was likely in Voldemort's clutches. Both Dumbledore and Atticus avoided discussing Barty Sr.'s current predicament, knowing he was in grave danger. While he might not be dead, they speculated that Voldemort would use him in a resurrection ceremony, publicly executing a former ministry official who had enforced anti-Death Eater policies to reassert his dominance. Despite the grim outlook, Atticus hoped to uncover how Barty Sr. deceived the Dementors. Such creatures were unlikely to negotiate with him. Regarding Winky, Headmaster Dumbledore, Atticus began, referring to the house elf at Barty Crouch Sr.'s home, I propose we return her to the Crouch family. The situation was a delicate one, a casual test meant to confirm Atticus Blaine's suspicions. The person before him was not Barty Crouch Sr. If it were truly the Elder Crouch, he would never have allowed the return of the elf he had once banished. Even a pretender would likely avoid bringing back an elf who knew the truth about his disguise, as it would only invite trouble. Atticus had hoped to engage the person in conversation, seeking clues to verify his theories. To his surprise, the impostor became visibly agitated at the mention of the elf, ultimately agreeing to Atticus's proposal. This reaction confirmed to Atticus that the pretender had a close connection to the Crouch family, placing him in a challenging position. I understand your concerns, Atticus, Dumbledore said calmly, but since you've made a promise, let this poor elf, return to the Crouch family. I believe it aligns with its wishes. From what I know of Tom, he won't pay any attention to this little creature. It was likely this elf who cared for Barty Crouch Jr. during his 14 years of secret imprisonment. He has a deep affection for the elf, and perhaps it will be the one to ultimately save both Barty Sr. and Barty Crouch Jr. Atticus raised an eyebrow, nodding thoughtfully. Twinkle, he called softly, and with a pop, an elf appeared in the headmaster's office. Compared to 2 weeks ago, the elf, loyal to the Crouch family, looked even more worn. Its short top and skirt were stained with soup and soot, tattered by flames, resembling a scavenger from a garbage dump. Amusingly, Twinkle had developed a bad habit, clutching a nearly empty bottle of butterbeer, reeking of alcohol. Clearly, this wasn't its first drink. It took Twinkle about 10 seconds to realize where she was, standing before the two most influential figures at Hogwarts, still holding the bottle. She instinctively tried to hide it, but where could she conceal it from the wizards? The alcohol made her dizzy, and she struggled to stand, eventually collapsing with a thud. The bottle slipped from her grasp, rolling away and spilling its contents onto the office carpet, leaving a noticeable stain. The great Mr. Dumbledore. Mr. Blaine, Winky, Winky, Twinkle stammered. Fear etched across her dirty face. Despite her longing for Mr. Crouch, she belonged to Hogwarts now, and being summoned by her master while drunk was far from the image of a proper house elf. Twinkle has finished her work. She blinked hard, tears of fear spilling from her eyes, dotted with small brown nodules. Winky can clean up, Mr. Dumbledore. Mr. Blaine, please don't take Winky. For a house elf, being dismissed once was shameful enough. To be dismissed twice would mark it as a deeply flawed elf, one no wizard would employ again. What purpose does a house elf serve if not to be used by wizards? Twinkle trembled, her lips turning blue with fear as she subconsciously sought forgiveness. Atticus Blaine wiped the wine stains from the carpet. "Don't worry about that, Twinkle," he said, leaving his seat to help Shining, who was on the floor trying to clean the mess. Atticus crouched down, meeting Shining's gaze. His eyes seemed to swirl with purple clouds, captivating the elf so completely that for a moment he forgot his fear of being expelled once more. "I have good news for you, Winky," Atticus said with a warm smile. "You can go home." End of this chapter. Chapter 698, Induction. "Go home," Atticus Blaine said gently, his voice filled with a warmth that contrasted with Twinkle's wide, tear-filled eyes. The little elf, with eyes as large as tennis balls, was clearly confused by Mr. Blaine's words. "That's right, Twinkle," Atticus continued, not intending to tease the elf. He offered a reassuring smile. "During my few days away from school, I went to visit Barty Crouch." Twinkle's reaction was immediate and telling. The mention of Barty's name caused the elf to tense with excitement, its loyalty to the old master evident. It forgot all decorum, staring at Atticus with a trembling voice. "You met Mr. Crouch, Mr. Blaine? How is he? Is Mr. Crouch okay?" "To be honest, he's not doing particularly well," Atticus replied patiently. "You might not know this, Twinkle, but in organizing the first task of the Triwizard Tournament, he personally visited several dragon reserves. Unfortunately, he had an accident in Hungary and was injured. His colleagues at the ministry advised him to recuperate at St. Mungo's, but his dedication to his work delayed his treatment. Now he must rest at home." "Oh, I pity Mr. Crouch." Twinkle's tears flowed freely down its shining cheeks. "My poor Mr. Crouch, he is unwell, and how will he manage without Winky's help? He needs me. I've cared for the Crouch family since I was born." "Just as you said, Twinkle," Atticus spoke softly. "When I visited, Barty was struggling alone. His house was cold, without a fireplace, and he was living on Muggle instant food. As a busy ministry official, it's understandable that he lacks certain life skills, but he can't continue like this. He's getting worse." Before Twinkle could dissolve into tears again, Atticus quickly added, "So I suggested he find someone to help him. Knowing Barty wouldn't want a stranger in his home, I recommended you." Twinkle's sobs halted abruptly, as if a pause button had been pressed. Tears still glistened on its cheeks, but its eyes were wide with disbelief. 2 streaks of snot dangled from its nose, nearly reaching its open mouth. "Although Barty was hesitant about my suggestion, I managed to convince him," Atticus smiled, gently patting Twinkle on the shoulder. "You can return to Barty and continue caring for him, Twinkle, if you wish. I don't know if you mind that Barty dismissed you." Return to Mr. Crouch. Twinkle's mind latched onto the most important part of Atticus's words. It could return to the Crouch family. It was being accepted back by Mr. Crouch. Twinkle trembled with a dreamy expression. "Mr. Crouch asked Winky to go back," Twinkle murmured, its body shaking more and more. Suddenly, it collapsed to the ground, pounding the floor in joyous tears. "Mr. Crouch forgives Twinkle. Oh, my great master, he is willing to forgive Winky for her mistake. What a kind wizard he is, woohoo! Watching the elf overwhelmed with emotion simply because Barty Crouch, who had once dismissed it, was taking it back, both Dumbledore and Atticus felt a weight in their hearts. They knew Twinkle was unaware of what awaited it. "And you, the great Mr. Blaine!" Twinkle suddenly rushed to Atticus's feet, clutching a corner of his robe as if in worship, tears streaming down its face. "It was you who made Mr. Crouch accept Winky. You are amazing, Mr. Blaine, a truly kind-hearted wizard. Winky will always remember your help and will surely repay you." A house elf's gratitude. Atticus pursed his lips, feeling the sincerity in Twinkle's words. There was a hint of hesitation in his eyes, but then the light in them steadied. "Old Barty is my friend, Twinkle. How can I stand by and watch him in such a helpless situation now?" Atticus Blaine pulled the partition of Twinkle's compartment and raised it. Some in the magical world hold prejudices against Barty, but many more recognize him as a respectable official of the Ministry of Magic. Since joining the ministry, he has worked diligently. Honestly, at his age, he should be resting, enjoying life, finding freedom, and perhaps a congenial lady to spend his remaining years with. Judging by the expression on Twinkle's face, it had already regarded Atticus as a confidant. "Oh, Winky thinks so too, Mr. Blaine." Twinkle sniffed, a mix of pride and melancholy in its voice. "But Mr. Crouch loves his work at the ministry and isn't inclined to spend time on leisure and enjoyment. Winky once advised Mr. Crouch to find another wife, but since the mistress passed away, he has never been close to any other ladies again." "Impressive," Atticus admired. "He is dedicated to his career and extremely loyal to his love. I heard that Barty's wife died of illness that year." Winky was lost in the joy of returning to the Crouch family and the pride of Mr. Crouch himself. When it suddenly heard Atticus's question, its calm demeanor trembled, and its expression became slightly unnatural. "You are right, Mr. Blaine. The mistress had been in poor health. Perhaps you have heard about Master Barty." Atticus nodded, casting encouraging glances at Winky, while Dumbledore, who had been observing quietly, leaned forward involuntarily. "After that incident, the mistress suffered a great blow, and her health deteriorated. Although Mr. Crouch did his utmost to help her recover, it's a pity." The sadness in Twinkle's voice was genuine. "I dare say Barty was as affected as his wife. Moreover, he had to bear the grief of her death and the shame of his son being imprisoned in Azkaban." "Has he forgiven him, Twinkle? I mean, does old Barty still struggle to understand his son's mistakes? Has he visited him over the years?" Atticus asked with concern. A look of uneasiness flashed across Twinkle's face again, and it subconsciously lowered its head to avoid Atticus's gaze, feeling both frightened and guilty. There were truths it couldn't reveal to Mr. Blaine. It could only lie to its master's friend and a wizard who had shown it kindness. "Oh no, sir," Twinkle whispered. "Before the mistress passed away, Mr. Crouch accompanied her to visit Master Barty once. Since then, Mr. Crouch has never seen Master Barty again." "Oh, old Barty shouldn't have let his wife go to Azkaban," Atticus said, narrowing his eyes. "Dementors can strip away happiness and hope. Perhaps it was the influence of those terrible creatures that Barty's wife couldn't withstand." "You are right, Mr. Blaine," Twinkle said, deeply grateful for Mr. Blaine's concern for its master, though his questions made it uneasy. It twisted its body nervously. "But the mistress insisted on visiting Master Barty in Azkaban, Mr. Blaine. She loved Master Barty dearly and was willing to do anything for him. Mr. Crouch couldn't dissuade her. We had to let her go. Not long after returning from Azkaban, she left us." Twinkle's voice trailed off, and Atticus finally concluded his probing questions. He turned to look at Dumbledore. The two exchanged glances, seeing surprise and relief in each other's eyes. End of this chapter. Chapter 699. Opinion. As Atticus Blaine watched Winky gleefully accept a wool sock from Dumbledore's hand, bow, and quickly vanish from the headmaster's office, he was left speechless. Winky was the first house elf he had ever seen who seemed genuinely happy about being dismissed. Despite her current allegiance to Hogwarts, Winky's heart still longed for her former master, Barty Crouch Sr., without even a farewell to Dobby, who had shared her hardships. This unwavering loyalty to Crouch Sr. highlighted the free will of house elves, showing that they, too, could choose their preferred masters. Atticus paused, contemplating this revelation, and turned back to face Dumbledore. He expected to see a sigh on the headmaster's face, but instead Dumbledore was gazing at the old wool sock in his hand with a look of reluctance. "Is there a special story about that sock, headmaster?" Atticus raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Dumbledore sighed, tucking the lone woolen sock into his pocket, clearly unwilling to part with it. "These are among the few woolen socks I have, Atticus. For years, people have insisted on giving me all sorts of books for Christmas, assuming that I, as an old man, enjoy reading to pass the time. It's not entirely wrong, but—" Dumbledore's blue eyes twinkled with a hint of hope. "They overlook my true needs." "I understand how you feel," Atticus replied, rolling his eyes. "Just like I have a fondness for golden galleons and beautiful gems, yet no one seems to guess my desires." After sharing a light-hearted moment, they both settled back into their seats. "Regarding the test I just conducted, do you think Voldemort will notice any clues, Headmaster Dumbledore?" Atticus inquired. To uncover secrets about Barty Crouch Jr., examining Winky's memory would be the easiest route. However, neither Atticus nor Dumbledore entertained this idea, as sending Winky back would be too risky. Atticus had to rely on seemingly innocuous questions to gather clues. "I doubt Tom will bother to check Winky's memory at all, Atticus," Dumbledore replied, his smile fading as his expression turned serious. "If he were to scrutinize an elf's memory so thoroughly, it would be alarming." As for Barty Crouch Jr., Dumbledore paused, his brows furrowing in thought, then continued in a somber tone. "He will undoubtedly interrogate Winky. There's no question about it. He's a clever boy, and if I recall correctly, he earned 12 OWLs. "Do you think he might be suspicious?" Atticus asked urgently. "Yes, Atticus, but I don't believe you need to worry excessively," Dumbledore reassured him in a deep voice. "If Barty Crouch Jr. hasn't completely abandoned the good within him, unlike Tom, he should feel grateful to Winky. He may have doubts, but he'll likely convince himself it's just his imagination. Revealing his suspicions to Tom would mean losing Winky immediately." Dumbledore's mastery of understanding human nature was undeniable, even without his formidable magical abilities. After a moment of reflection, Atticus nodded slightly. From Winky's hesitant answers, they had begun to piece together how Barty Crouch Sr. had helped his son escape Azkaban. Both Dumbledore and Atticus, two exceptionally intelligent wizards, had essentially reconstructed Barty's actions from the past. It was a poignant realization. Even Atticus had not anticipated that a stern Ministry of Magic official like Barty would possess such a tender side, not for his son, but for his wife. Barty's wife's love for her son was as profound as the love Harry's parents had for him. "To know why you seem so oblivious to the feelings of those around you." Hermione's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Her eyes, usually warm and inviting, now held a fierce intensity that made Harry take a step back. Harry was taken aback, his mind racing to understand the source of Hermione's frustration. I don't understand, Hermione. What did I do?" he stammered, genuinely perplexed. Hermione sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly as some of the tension left her body. "It's not just about what you did, Harry. It's about what you didn't do. You need to be more aware of how your actions affect others. We're all in this together, and sometimes it feels like you're only focused on the mystery at hand." Ron, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, his voice tentative. "Harry, I think what Hermione's trying to say is that we all have our roles to play, and sometimes you get so caught up in the big picture that you forget about the little things that matter." Harry nodded slowly, the realization dawning on him. "I see. I'm sorry, Hermione. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I'll try to be more considerate." Hermione's expression softened, and she gave Harry a small, forgiving smile. "That's all I ask, Harry. We're a team, and we need to support each other." The tension between them eased, and the trio continued their walk to Gryffindor Tower, the air around them lighter than before. As they climbed the stairs, Harry couldn't help but think about Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine's investigation. He was determined to find out more, but he knew now that he had to balance his curiosity with the needs of his friends. Meanwhile, back in his office, Dumbledore watched the trio from his window, a thoughtful expression on his face. He turned to Atticus Blaine, who was still seated across from him. "You see, Atticus, even the smallest misunderstandings can lead to great lessons. It's important that we guide them, but also let them find their own way. Atticus nodded, his eyes following the students as they disappeared from view. Indeed, Albus, they have much to learn, but I have faith in them. Now about the Yule Ball, Dumbledore chuckled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Ah, yes, the Yule Ball, a chance for joy and celebration amidst the chaos. We mustn't forget the importance of such moments, Atticus. They remind us of what we're fighting for. With that, the two professors returned to their discussion, their minds focused on the challenges ahead, but their hearts warmed by the promise of brighter days. What do you think about Fleur inviting you to the Yule Ball? End of this chapter. Chapter 700, Boys' Style. What do you think of Fleur's invitation? Harry was taken aback, his eyes wide with confusion. What did it mean? Fleur had already explained that she chose him because of his friendly demeanor when she first arrived at Hogwarts and because she liked the dress he had given her. Of course, there had been some misunderstandings, and Harry was eager to clarify them, but Fleur hadn't given him the chance to speak. Was Hermione upset because Harry had accepted Fleur's invitation? Ron was equally bewildered, casting a puzzled glance at Hermione. Observing the two clueless boys before her, Hermione shook her head and sighed deeply, as if to say, "You are hopeless." Yet, the anger in her heart began to dissipate. "Let's talk about it when we get back," she said, stepping forward once more. The school year had come to an end. Although the professors had assigned a mountain of homework, no young wizard, except Hermione, could bear to spend this endless fun time cooped up in the dull library. The lively Gryffindor students were living a life of revelry and leisure. During the day, they gathered on the castle grounds for snowball fights and games. As night fell, they returned to the common room to party, dispersing only late into the night. When the portrait of the fat lady swung open, the warm glow of candlelight filled the common room, and the jubilant atmosphere was even more vibrant than in previous days. Fred and George were stationed at a round table, selling a new product they had developed, an amusing cookie. Eating it would transform you into a canary covered in feathers for 1 minute. Ever since Neville had been tricked into advertising this biscuit, sales had soared, and Neville himself seemed to have taken a liking to the canary biscuits, giving Fred and George plenty of silver sickles in return. "Oh, look who's here, the most enviable boy right now." The twin brothers, perched high, immediately spotted Harry and his friends as they entered. They leaped over the heads of Colin and Dennis Creevey, landing in front of a startled Harry. "You always work miracles, don't you, Harry?" George exclaimed, giving Harry a hearty slap on the arm, while Fred winked at him. "Take a picture, Harry, just to celebrate." Colin had already raised his camera, eager to capture the moment. "What? No!" Harry reacted quickly, covering his face with his hands. "Stop it, Colin!" Suddenly, boys from every corner of the noisy lounge gathered around Harry. Many applauded him, though some eyed him with jealousy. Harry's protests were in vain. Colin's camera flashed repeatedly, capturing a series of dazzling images. "How ridiculous, Harry!" Seamus emerged from the crowd, grinning as he playfully punched Harry on the shoulder. "It's not surprising at all, right? The boy who lived defeated the mysterious man. Which girl can resist your charm?" Harry was beginning to understand the commotion. He tried to explain the misunderstanding, shouting that Fleur hadn't asked him to be her dance partner because she liked him. They didn't know about the dress yet. But in this chaotic scene, who would bother to listen to Harry's explanations? The boys lined up to congratulate Harry, each one giving him a friendly slap or punch on the back, a gesture of respect for winning over the most sought-after girl at Hogwarts. "Oh, why don't you look happy, Hermione?" George asked, noticing Hermione's stern expression as Harry was swept away by the crowd. With a smile, he folded his arms and watched Harry, who was becoming increasingly flustered. "I think it must be because it was hard to make big news, but Harry stole the limelight." Fred grinned mischievously at Hermione and Ron. "Ahem!" Ron coughed into his fist, trying to appear serious. "Listen, you two, there's nothing funny about this." Despite his attempt at solemnity, Fred and George exchanged glances, their faces contorting into exaggerated expressions as they repeated, "This is nothing funny," before bursting into laughter and scampering off to count the extra coins in their theft wallets. "Don't be mad, Hermione," Ron said, watching Fred and George retreat with a mix of irritation and embarrassment. You know they love their silly jokes. Hermione's stern expression wasn't solely due to Fred and George's antics, but Ron's awkward attempt at comfort softened her demeanor slightly. With a sigh, she and Ron navigated through the bustling crowd to the sofa by the fireplace. The lounge was alive with chatter, all eyes on Harry, who had recently accomplished something noteworthy. As Ron and Hermione settled down, they exchanged glances that felt oddly intimate, as if they were the only two people in the room. Their cheeks flushed with an awkward redness. Ron, feeling the heat, turned his gaze to the flickering flames in the fireplace and tugged at his collar. It's really warm in here, he muttered. Hermione remained silent, her lips pressed together, which only heightened Ron's unease. His eyes drifted to Harry, surrounded by admirers. After a moment, he remarked, "He's still so popular, isn't he?" "Not entirely," Hermione replied unexpectedly, her gaze shifting over Lavender's head to a pale girl leaning against an old chest of drawers. "Oh, Ginny?" Ron followed her gaze to see Ginny, her expression forlorn as she watched Harry. Her once vibrant red hair seemed to have lost its luster. "You're right, Hermione. Ginny must be going through a lot. Honestly, I didn't think she'd stay so fixated on Harry," Ron said with a casual shrug. Hermione frowned at his dismissive tone, but chose not to comment further. About an hour later, Harry finally joined them, his cheeks flushed, perhaps from the butterbeer or the numerous compliments he'd received. A sweet smile played on his lips, as if he'd achieved something wonderful. "What are you talking about?" he asked, sitting next to Hermione, seemingly having forgotten the questions he carried from the principal's office. While Harry was away, Ron and Hermione had stumbled through an awkward conversation, avoiding the painful topic of the Yule Ball. Ron couldn't fathom Hermione's thoughts, and it took all his willpower not to flee. Harry's return dispelled the tension, and Ron exhaled in relief, noticing Hermione's shoulders relax slightly. Yet as she straightened, Ron's gaze was drawn to her, and he quickly refocused on Harry. "How long will you bask in your glory?" Hermione teased, her eyes narrowing at Harry. What?" Harry replied, ruffling his messy hair in confusion. But the seriousness in Hermione's eyes jolted him back to reality, and he recalled the events before entering the lounge. "I'm not proud, Hermione," he insisted, trying to reassure her. The tension had eased somewhat, and Hermione was no longer upset with Harry for accepting Fleur's invitation. However, Harry remained puzzled. Why had Hermione been angry in the first place? "It's not my fault," Harry said, feeling a bit aggrieved. "Fleur was the one who invited me." Hermione took a deep breath, her eyes flashing with frustration as she glared at Harry. She wanted to ask why he couldn't see the obvious, but she managed to rein in her emotions. Her tone softened, though her expression remained stern. "When will you realize that Fleur is using you, Harry?" she asked pointedly. End of this chapter.